Hello, welcome to another episode of Summoning Insight. We're here to talk about the conclusion of the group stage, but probably mostly the quarterfinal matchups, because that's what's actually exciting at the World Championship. Not focusing on what's happened in the past, not focusing on teams that will no longer be playing because they are trash, but we do have to make fun of TSM. That's the problem here. It wouldn't be us, Thorin, would it, if we didn't just take this advantage to have a party?
We're definitely going to focus for loads of this episode about TSM. And by the way, joke's on you guys, because in a weird way, you are sort of correct, which is, even though it's not true that we make loads of money from hits and clicks, that part's not true. Sadly, the only part of the dumb conspiracy theory that I wish was true, which is that you make millions of dollars just talking about TSM. Sadly, that part isn't true, but it is true that they are relevant in as much as, we have all watched Western League of Legends for all these years. So you can't not talk about them. It was a number one seeded team. In fact, you know what? That's why always be careful what you wish for, stupid fans. Because I'll tell you what, if TSM was the third seed, follow me on this one. No, if they were the second seed, if they'd had FlyQuest spot and had FlyQuest group, I wouldn't even be able to diss them that much. I'd go, well, obviously you're not going to get that group. So the joke is, we have to wreck them now because they're a bloody Pool 1 team. Guys, are you aware a Pool 1 team just went 0-6 at Worlds? TSM single-handedly is invalidating Riot's entire format.
Which is wonderful.
Which garbage. Yeah, exactly. But I never thought this is true martyrdom. These are the guys where it's they're just basically, TSM at Worlds was that fucking monk who just sat down and self-immolated during the Vietnam War. except in TSM's case, they didn't do it voluntarily.
Or even, out of sense to some sort of noble cause, like ending a war. The TSM would never have that level of nobility, you gotta say. They don't...
If they could have actually fixed the format, yeah, it would have been noble, but they weren't doing it on purpose, were they, unfortunately.
The problem, and we should talk about the format a little bit. I know we talk about formats all the time, but Thor and I are both format nerds, and it does, it does show a lot of the issues that we had. I don't want to necessarily focus on how dumb it is that a seed 1 from a major region could go 0-6 and completely, as you say, Thorin, invalidate the format. More about what we would do to fix said format moving forward in the future, because I think that's the bigger issue. But what I do find is very interesting about this is that Riot is in the conundrum right now where they would, in order to fix the format, they would have to actually acknowledge that NA is not worthy of a Pool 1 seed, right? And that goes against, they would have to basically throw their darling region that is consistently underperformed under the bus in order for that to happen. And, might I add, they have a very convenient excuse this year, because who would they give that Pool 1 seed to? Likely Vietnam, you would have to say. And yet Vietnam was not able to compete. What a shame that the Vietnamese teams couldn't prove that they were better than North American teams. So I'm not sure they will change it, honestly.
Even think, by the way, Monty, they've pitted themselves into a corner on this one. They haven't, in the sense that it's Riot Games. Remember, no matter what happens, Riot Games will always be the little Lord Fauntleroy who owns this entire fucking game and could do anything they want and could go home with their football anytime they please and stop the game for the rest of us. So realistically, they can continue to do Worlds forever if they want. But to me, the criminal thing about this is, here's the thing, Monty. If you notice, a lot of Riot's sort of edicts are very vague, abstract concepts well, of course, 2 regions could never play each other at group stage. They don't go on to explain why or show
why
past
it's bad.
Evidence. They just say it like some edict from God.
But why is that even bad?
The universe? No, but here's one of the weirdest things about that. So along similar lines, right? Imagine a similar edict, Monty, was, Pool 1 is to represent all of the regions in the world that are at a major status. And so what you'd go an abstract route and you'd go, since we can't technically know based on competition where these teams will be seeded, we have to treat each region as though their best team could be one of the top seeds. And so we give them a top seed. Problem with that is, Monty, you already took LMS's seed away. In fact, you took LMS the entire fucking league away. So if they're not allowed to be a top seed, and they fucking won Worlds, for God's sake, they not only won Worlds, Flash Wolves in Season 5 was in quarters. They've had teams that have made playoffs. Yeah, not very much in the last few years. But I just want to say this. Why does one Cloud9 team ever, by the way, also carried by imports, making one semi-final make NA not a failure region? It doesn't, of course not. TSM failing every year isn't affected by what Jensen does in Cloud9. It's irrelevant in it. So what I'm pointing out here is, if Riot has the gall to say, I don't really give a fuck if you're from Taiwan. Almost did my own fucking Freudian stuff there. Not on that side yet, boys. Doesn't matter if you're from Taiwan. I'm taking your slot away because your region isn't good enough, right? Okay, Riot. I actually agree with you, by the way. I think that's a good thing. So now let's follow the same logic, which, to be fair, we must now take LCS's slots away. Like, they must be pool 2, and I'd even go ahead and say, if you look at the historical track record, probably should be 2 slots now. And I'm not saying that, by the way. This isn't me doing the Twitter thing of, like, memeing on NA, like, haha, they're all shit. It's like, they actually don't justify 3 slots, guys. Look at the world we're in. Like, put it this way. We were all memeing on China's, like, 4th fucking slot. LCS doesn't justify 3 in the current format, especially if we have planes. So some of these teams, like I'd rather take that slot. I'm not joking, and make that another like plane slot for Worlds or something. Like, let some team come to planes. Could be like you're saying, Vietnamese team. Could be a Brazilian team. I don't know.
Could be another Chinese team,
or Turkey or something. Whoever it is, let them get it through planes. Because sending a 3rd team from NA feels like a waste to me right now.
Yeah, it's. I don't know. I think the way you've
still pretty good if you have some good teams. Like, if that had been Cloud9 and in this case Team Liquid, those teams would have done fine at Worlds, you know.
Yeah, I think like also the other side of this coin is that a lot of the I think the NA clapback was a little bit unjustified because, you know, FlyQuest and Liquid, I think, overperformed. They were fine.
In the context of their groups, listen, yeah, they obviously didn't get out the groups. So I'll never say they did well. But in the context of their groups, I actually think relative to who was in their groups, they both did, like, slightly above expectations. Like, nobody thought Fly was going to beat top Esports. Nope. Nobody thought that Team Liquid would beat everyone in the group. By the way, beating everyone implies you might have gotten out. So I actually think, yeah, those 2 teams have nothing to be ashamed about except not making playoffs. That's it. TSM's is unforgivable if you look at. If you had the context for them, theirs really is outrageous. But we'll get into that with the guest.
I mean, I do think that the other problem with this, though, Thorin, is that, you know, sure, FlyQuest beat top, but it's really hard to say because that game was meaningless. You know, what
Top Esports was definitely in the playoffs, in case people don't know. It was just about them and DRX basically playing for seeding. So at that point in time, yeah, Top could lose both last games and this still would be like 2nd seed or something, so it wouldn't have mattered.
Yeah, and if I'm Top in that situation, I don't really care if I get 1st or 2nd seed because I'm the favorite of the tournament anyway. Like, obviously, you'd rather get the 1st seed, but, you know, with G2 got 2nd seed, and I still think they're going to be fine in the overall playoffs. If you are a heavy favorite in the tournament, you should be able to take out any other team that you match up with. And so at that point, it's more about not showing a bunch of your strategies or just kind of defaulting back. And to give an example of this, one of the things that you could say is like, okay, well, you go on autopilot if you're a team in one of those games, meaning that you're not going to show any weird picks. You just want to play as conventionally your style as possible. You're not going to do any weird level 1s. You're not going to do any weird rotations or like set piece strategies, right? And some teams, like Top Esports, have like the autopilot of an F-35, like a super advanced autopilot, whereas other teams have much shittier autopilots, right? Depending on how good the kind of base level of that team is. And credit to FlyQuest, but I really just don't. It's really hard to watch those games, and this is another issue that we don't bring up about the Worlds format.
Put it this way, that 369 thought Urgot was the best top lane champion available team. You know, for example, there's like one just for free for people, you know, like that looks like, as Monty's saying, like this is a champion I used to play in the past, obviously, because I'm a top laner, but I'm definitely not going to play it the rest of the world, so fuck it. Why not try it on this one game, and if it works weirdly, maybe we use it one other time. Like, that looks like what the draft is like to me, put it that way.
What tilts me so much, Thorin, about this is, okay, you want this format, right? You need it, or whatever logic there is behind it. Why don't you run GSL groups? And this is a format that isn't new. It existed, as the name implies, in the GSL, the StarCraft tournament, and indeed it has existed in StarCraft in some way, shape, or form for many years. And what GSL groups are, guys, is that they are double elimination 4-team groups that are commonly used across other esports if you're not aware. We use them in Flashpoint, the tournament that Thorin and I run, because they're very good. You will be seeing that. By the way, if you have 2 monitors up right now, Flashpoint closed qualifiers are underway. So go ahead and head over there.
Listen to this very quickly. There are 3 benefits to running GSL groups specifically versus round robin. Because if people don't know, round robin is basically the precursor to GSL style groups, essentially double elim groups, and they were invented to address the concerns of round robin. So, for example, in a GSL group, because it's essentially a mini double elim bracket in a group instead of a round robin format, you never get the meaningless game where one team is playing or both are playing for nothing. Doesn't happen, yeah. Essentially, if you're still playing, you are playing to still qualify. If you're out, you're out. So you don't have to worry about that. So a Riot person would go, well, that's a downside because you don't get to play that extra game. It's a meaningless game, is my point. Secondly, you have less games overall, as in you don't, because you don't get the meaningless ones. So that's cut out. That's a bonus for the format, guys. Anytime you can trim out games in one part that aren't necessary, you can add them in another. And then thirdly, this is probably the best part, is what was the third one?
I can explain this super well, by the way. Like,
wait there 1 second. There's one more that I'm missing though. What was the third one? Oh, no ties. You don't need tiebreakers because there can never be a tie. You just get the two teams that qualify. Yeah, that's the other benefit one. Because also, think about that. I actually think it ruins tournaments in round robin. That phase where it's usually before the last game or second to last game where people have to start doing like a fucking, like that guy out of the Numbers TV show, like, follow the numbers, Mason. What's it up? Like, if I win this game, but then they lose, but the other one doesn't lose, it's like, who wants to do that to know where you are in the fucking group? How about this? Am I still playing? Yes. Then you are still in the tournament. Good. Thank you. Like, that's all I need to know. Like, we don't need to know all the... Because those tiebreakers, like, it happens every Worlds. Even, I mean, now sometimes they don't even play tiebreakers to get out of the groups, whether you're first or second. So, to me, it's a flawed system if you frequently have to add extra games for no reason.
Yeah, and I think the other super interesting thing about the format that we're discussing. So in the current Riot system, there are 12 games that occur in every group, right? For the 2-team or the 4-team double round robin. So you're talking about 12 best of ones with all the setup time and everything in between. So if it's a broadcast length question, in a GSL group, you don't have to play the finals because the team who advances through the winner's bracket can be declared the number 1 seed, right? So you win two matches and you're in. So in a theoretical universe where we were playing best of 3s in a GSL group, you would only... I
imagine it's going to take the same.
You would only play 5 best of 3s, which, by the way, guys, is a maximum of 15 games. Now, they're already playing 12. And
they play tiebreakers sometimes at the moment,
yeah,
so
and
probably
they play
a similar amount of games.
And so the minimum would be 10, but the average would be about 12 to 13 games in a group. So you're really not expanding the broadcast limitations by that much. You don't have to really radically increase time that you would play each and every group. So it would fit into the current calendar. So it becomes even more confusing that they do that at this point. By the way, GSL groups, guys, the way you play them out too, is that you would have time to prepare for each opponent and you would have best of 3s, which more accurately reflects what China and Korea do on a daily basis. Because remember, half of the teams that are at Worlds never even play best of 1s all year. Right? So
think about this. Imagine just this Worlds alone, because of best of 3, you would have seen matches like Jingdong against Damwon in a best of 3, Top Esports against DRX in a best of 3. Even if you want a Western matchup, you would have seen Fnatic against TSM in a best of 3. Like, who the fuck doesn't want these matches? Like, the irony is, all those edicts I referred to earlier that Riot made, like you can only have one region in a group. What you're essentially doing, and this is what Riot fails to do, is before you implement the solution, you have to ask yourself, what was the problem? So if the problem they're saying, which I don't disagree with the current circuit, is these teams don't meet regularly enough. So the rare time they do meet, let's make them have like a mixture of opponents. So that, for example, the Chinese team doesn't just play 2 other Chinese teams, which in a rare case might happen, right? Okay, so if what you're saying, Riot, is we don't get enough of this like inter-regional matchups, have these best of 3s then. Because then in that scenario, it doesn't matter if TSM or Fnatic doesn't make it. They already played a best of 3. By the way, if you want to get cynical, how many Western fans do you think would watch that matchup? A best of 3 brings Fnatic and TSM. All of them. Literally all of them. Like, that might even be the losers fucking match and it'd be the most watched match in the group or something, you know, like I even think they're missing out on the entertainment angle. Like, it would actually increase that aspect. The flaw is this, right? Even though you did a good argument there, pointing out there wouldn't even be that many more games if we switch it out versus the current format.
Might be less, in fact.
Even when they do add them, because obviously that's the number one thing people are going to say against double elim. Because in my opinion, the bracket draw also screams that we've got to change this format. So I'll wait all year long to see a fucking LPL bracket play out with with one European team,
and
and then an LCK bracket with one European team. That's not what I was waiting all year for. That's garbage. Like, so you mean I can only see LPL and LCK play a best of 5 in the final if the European teams don't upset? That's the only time I get one. I don't get another one other than that at all. I got a best of 1 between Gen.G and fucking what Damwon, and I could just be happy with that. Best of 1. I guess I got 2 best of 1s, and I got 2 best of 1s top.
Just why we need a double win bracket for sure.
Yeah, because here's the thing: single lower bracket would have fixed this completely. Like then we'd get all the great matches. But even more importantly, then this is the thing that we're going to have to get through people's heads, or we're never going to be able to change the format. Is most good formats almost necessitate that people can choose not to watch some of the matches. And until we get to that world, we'll never change it in League. Because in League, it's still the same case. People think of worlds as like, right, I wake up and watch the first game. I watch the whole day. At the end of the day, they tell me, like, come back tomorrow and we're going to have these. And it's like it's like when I used to be a little kid in England, we only had like 4 channels, Monty. You just watch whatever's on TV, don't you? You don't watch it. In fact, all you're doing, even, we used to say we're watching TV. We didn't say watch a specific show because I don't have a choice what's on television. I sit down at 6. And if my favourite show is at 8, I watch a rubbish show at 7 and an all right one at 7. Like, that's the old way. Why are we stuck like me as a fucking boomer kid in the 80s? We're in 2020, guys. Everyone's viewing media the opposite. It's like Netflix. I choose all the shows now, or I can go to this one from past year, pick up. So we're in a world of choice, but for League, we have to like experience some weird fucked up variety show aspect from my childhood. Can't we just have a choice? Like, can't I choose to watch the Jing Dong DRX Best of 5 and then you can go and watch your fucking Fnatic versus someone else or whatever? Like, I think that's the world I want to live in.
Yeah, I agree. Like, the problem is that I like you're saying, appreciate what Riot's doing when they're trying to mix up the regions so that we actually get to see matchups that we don't get to see the rest of the year, which in itself, this is another issue, is in and of itself, this is also a Riot created problem that we don't have more international events, so we can't see them. So it's like you when Riot explains something, there's always like a different layer to it, which is like, okay, so I understand that, but why don't we just have more international events then so that we can see it more, right? If that's the concern. But I think the other aspect is I would love to see a double elimination bracket in the playoffs, obviously, but that does increase broadcast time. My point about the GSL groups is that this doesn't increase broadcast time at all, and it increases the quality of the matches significantly. Because look at those last days, guys,
where you can never have additional games. You can actually perfectly schedule a GSL bracket. You can't with tiebreakers, actually. In the Riot format, you never know when you have to just chuck an extra game and just make the broadcast go longer.
I mean, yeah, it's probably balanced out by you don't know if it's 2 or 3 games in a best of 3. But the factor, too, is that when you look at these days, the final day of each of these groups, each team has to prepare for 3 different opponents in the same day. By the way, that never happens in any format in the world. It didn't even happen with the EU or the LEC Super Weeks this year, right? It's crazy to think you can prepare for 3 different teams in a best of 1 in a single day. GSL groups eliminate that problem because it would naturally spread out the games more so you could prepare more for specific opponents, therefore creating better matches at the same time. So it's very, very confusing to me that this format keeps getting used because as far as I can tell, all of the broadcast time considerations would be gone by using GSL groups because it would be the same. You still get the cool like matchups that they want to have, and that you could still use theoretically the pools to distribute teams, even though it's not my favorite, you could still do it. And it would make sense that we wouldn't have meaningless matches that make weird results and are not super exciting to watch, frankly, in my opinion. So I don't know. I think that there are certain things they could do. I'm really hoping, and obviously I think part of the issue this year is that everything about Worlds has been crunched into a tighter time window. Like we had no time between play-ins and groups. We had no time between the round robins and groups. We have very little time. Well, we have a normal amount of time actually between quarters, so it gets more normalized from here on out. But in a non-pandemic world, I'm super hoping that when we see Worlds next year, we're going to see a revamped format and revamped system, because I think it would only make the tournament more exciting in the end. And I think it would be really fun to watch a Worlds with more double elimination, more best of 3s. I would be psyched to watch that. So we've gone on about this. We're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we'll have Kold on, who is pursuing a coaching career right now, to discuss probably some NA stuff, because I'm curious about his coaching perspective on it, and then we'll dive into quarterfinals previews, which should be quite fun. All right, we're back. had to set up the cameras. Now we're here with Kold, who is actively pursuing a coaching career. And from the people I talk to, Kold, you're very impressive. They really like your coaching acumen and your ideas and your philosophy about the game. So I imagine you're going to get
Auction fans. Goes without saying.
I wonder who you have been talking to. So I mean,
me, don't worry, mate. It wasn't me. I told him you garbage.
That's a bold statement.
Actually, one thing I want to clarify, because what's weird, mate, is normally stuff gets to me through the grapevine. Did you actually say publicly that you were doing any coaching work at this Worlds? Because I only saw it when Broxer did that statement when he got eliminated. And in the statement, he basically implied that you were like his positional coach or something. Like, did you actually make it public? Was this like a secret behind the scenes thing you were just helping someone out? What was the situation with that?
No, I have not spoken about it at all publicly. So, no. I mean, it was very last minute kind of. After I went out and talked about that I was looking to go into coaching, Jed reached out to me, and from kind of one day to another, I started working very intensively with Broxa and tried to help him as much as possible. So that is kind of what happened.
Looked like he did a good job, mate. His Lily looked way better. I thought he was a meme in the fucking playoffs at LCS. He looked half decent at this tournament.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously it was only like I had, I think 3.5 weeks working with him. So how much can you really change from 3.5 weeks? It's a tough job, especially also because I didn't really have any guidelines to like how do I approach this, because obviously I've never tried.
It's a brand new thing, yeah, exactly.
So I went into it just with kind of an open mindset and see. First get like an assessment of, where are we at right now? What are we looking to? What is the things that he wanted to improve on, and also kind of the things that he struggled with, and then I just try to give him kind of a very honest opinion about how I saw it and how what things I would like to see him do better, and then it was kind of just back and forth giving feedback and try to make him play as well as he could within the frame of what he had to work with. So I think it was a very fun and also challenging job in a sense, but I really liked it. So again, it was like a reminder to me that this is something that I want to do going into the future. So it was very cool.
So I'm curious to have this conversation because we are faced with the yearly existential panic of North American teams where they start to absolutely flip out about their region. And presumably, Kold, if you're interested in coaching, you might potentially be interested in coaching in NA. So I have my own thoughts, and I don't want to spend too much time on this because it's just the same bullshit every single year. And I've seen a lot of the same arguments. Like, remember, guys, that the North American server is very small, and even a smaller proportion than other regions of that small population play ranked. So, like, America, both the NA server is both smaller and then also has a smaller percentage of players that play ranked games. So the competition is very difficult. There's obviously the ping issues. There's obviously the cultural issues. There are some points that haven't been brought up before that I find very interesting, in that many European pro gamers at one point in their lives were also athletes. There's been a number of people who are like, I was super into football or rugby, and they're used to getting
coached. It's also kind of standard in Europe, by the way. Almost every kid plays some sport when they're young, whether you're a nerd or not. Like, you just play a bad version of the sport. Yeah, like, it's not as weird as like that thing of being American where people just never touched a sport. That's alien to me. I've never seen that in England. Like, everyone played some version of sports. Yeah,
right. But there's so many people that you hear, and like, obviously they overblow themselves when it comes to their prospects. But I've heard from at least a dozen European pro gamers, well, I was going to be a professional footballer, but then I got injured, or I moved and I decided to do esports instead. I decided to play CSGO, or I decided to play League of Legends. And this is a very common story. I have heard that story 0 times from a North American player. And I think that part of it is that because European players are used to these very robust athletic systems in Europe, they get coaching from a younger age. They're introduced to competitive systems. They have more discipline. I think these are all true statements for the most part, on average. Obviously, you'll have outliers in either case. But the other reason that people don't think about is that here is one of the biggest problems with North America versus Europe. So venture capital is funding the vast majority of the North American teams and rosters. Meanwhile, in Europe, there is a lot less venture capital just culturally and financially within that system, not just in esports, but just in general. And what happens is when these teams come in to North America and they buy in and they're funded by these like venture capital behemoths, is that the demand from the top, because remember, these people don't really know anything about esports, is, oh, we got to sign these players with these big followings, or, we're looking to make the immediate splash. Like, we want to get in there and we want to, contend for the title immediately, import all the players, or buy out this North American player who's just okay for, $1 million or whatever. That's fine. So they throw around these huge sums of money, but there's never like, no one comes in with a long-term plan. Is the problem in America, is that no one comes in and says, you know what, we're going to build like a really good feeder system to our team. And it doesn't matter if it's going to take 3 years for us to develop this talent. That's going to be our strategy. No, when you see EG enter, they're just like throwing money everywhere. You know what I mean? Or Team Liquid builds their entire fucking brand image about Steve, with a money gun, like shooting it everywhere. You don't see that in Europe. You see teams like Mad Lions, coming in, and granted, they are a North American organization, Mad Lions. They're based in Toronto in Canada, but they come in and they're like, let's actually scout the ladder. Or EU Masters exists, and that doesn't exist in North America, which is, part of the infrastructural issue. But my point is like, these people are just tossing all this money out there, and there's this sense in North American esports, not just in League of Legends, that you have to have immediate success because the venture capital is coming in and they're trying to like increase the value of these teams. So like, we got to have the strong brand with the really well-recognized players, but it's not oftentimes decisions about the quality of the roster or the quality of the competitive roster. It's more about making the big announcement. You know what I mean? And that's just true.
True. I mean, at least from my perspective, a lot of it comes down to player development. And one thing that actually, during the last couple of months, I was speaking with a lot of GMs, both in NA and EU, and I think one thing that NA actually has that EU doesn't have as much is the fact that they actually have their academy players and staff within the same room, or not necessarily the same room, but in the same space. And I feel like if that was the case in EU, they would be able to elevate it even more. But so I don't have specific intel about like why it does not specifically work out, but I can just see from the outside that if you have so many players in the same building and you can't figure out how to develop these talents, then there has to be some kind of either a coaching issue.
It's a bigger issue, right?
Yeah. There has to be some issue within it, and
Yes.
I'm not gonna sit here and be the expert of like this is exactly why it's not working. But
Sure.
I think instead it's important to address the issues and then let the people that are actually working within it figure out, like how can we actually make this better, or invest into people that can come in and give some new perspective on things. I think especially players, former players like myself, are people that should be rated highly to figure out, like how do we progress players, or how do we develop players? Because back when I started many years ago, we did not have tools to help us develop. We just had to do it ourselves. We need to figure out just how do I become a better player? And nowadays there are just so much more infrastructure. But I mean, it does not matter how much infrastructure there is in the teams if they are not utilized, or if it doesn't bring any value. So I think that is a big thing, at least from my perspective on NA.
That's actually ridiculous because you are right about that. Like, unlike Europe, where because teams are playing in ERLs, oftentimes those players don't even live in the same location. Like, they don't all go to Berlin like the LEC teams. Like, they live wherever they live in whatever countries they're in. They play online. Like, that's usually the case until in a normal year you have the offline finals of whatever LFL, the UK League, etc. So, yeah, I agree with you actually on that one, Kold. Technically, NA isn't even utilizing the advantages they have. Like, basically, their advantage in having similar teams in the same facility is how Korea got ahead in the first fucking place in esports, is that you can practice internally in a way that some of it never has to leak to other teams because your own team's going to keep the secrets, hopefully. And also, you can ask them to practice in a specific way. So yeah, listen, the academy team isn't as good as your LCS team. That's obvious. But the point is you can do different types of practice with them. I actually do think that's mad under, and that even ties in, by the way, to kind of the cultural, I'll say that aspect, that I know LS brought up recently, where he said, did you hear this, Monty? He said that basically he'd heard directly, like from the horse's mouth, as it were, that there was players in LCS who refused to scrim the academy team because they didn't want to potentially help develop those players that they saw as being their replacements in the future.
Happened.
Now, the reason why that's crazy to me is because everyone else took that on the surface level and they made it like this. Right, am I against the player doing that, and is he an arsehole, or do I see the player's perspective? It's like, here's what I would say. Why is the player being consulted at all? You're like, that's like the guy who works at McDonald's being like, I'm not going to help train up this new guy. He might replace it. Who gives a fuck? Flip the burgers. I own the McDonald's. You just flip the burgers. Shut the fuck up. Like, in that scenario, what blows my mind about that is, why would the player even get a say in that? I'm your boss. You know that when I pay you 6 figures to play, you're playing this team now. Go ahead and do a good job. Like, the idea that the player can go, yeah, but it's not as good. Oh, so you're basically just like disobedient, and you're just someone who just won't do what he's told to do, or you have better, like in that scenario, how is that defensible? Like, I'm not saying only practice against this bad player, never against good team. Obviously, that would be ridiculous. That would be a waste of their time. We're talking about the occasional practice here. Like, throw them a bone, give them a scrim when you've got a free scrim. Like, the point that I'm making there is people don't get that it's still a systemic issue. Like, if I was actually in control of my org, not only is that a minor issue, like in that scenario, if that player complains, I would go and I would explain to him why part of what I'm paying him for isn't just to be the best at his role now, it's to help me develop my organization and establish a winning culture. And, you know, I need to train up this next guy because he's my academy ADC and I'm seeing where he's going to be in the future. And if he's not the future, I have to buy it. Like, if you can't get these conversations through as the owner, well, a guy on a fucking talk show isn't going to manage it, is it? Like, people need to actually start accepting responsibility all the way up the chain in NA. Everyone at all levels needs to basically, the buck has to stop with them in their domain, you know?
It's also just ridiculous that the teams themselves haven't gotten together and figured out an actual feeder system, because remember that the feeder system in NA is Cloud9, basically, to this point in time. Look at how many players, like, you can't simultaneously tell me that there's no talent in NA and then all of the new players basically that have come through the system, like come into the scene, have somehow all gone through Cloud9. And then they trade them away to different teams, or they come from Cloud9's academy team or what have you. But there have been very few players who have reached full-time starting positions in the LCS in the last 3 years.
Basically,
that haven't come through Cloud9.
If LCS is a battery, you've got the two, well, I know what fucking term is, anode is at the end of the battery. You've got the two, anode and cathode. There's one, one of each. I remember, there we go, I'm remembering shit now from science, whatever. Chemistry class. It's all paying off 25 years later, right? So you've got the battery, that's the LCS. Obviously, the energy in the middle, that's the players, right? So you have Cloud9, they're the positive. They're introducing players. They're bringing fresh players to the scene. Then you have the other end, you have TSM. They take players that seem to be good, destroy them completely, and reintroduce them back into the back. Like, there's a cycle that continues to go here, guys. And that's why NA is what it is.
Or TSM.
You always make a point.
Or you're TSM and you develop players like Tactical on your own academy team and then don't use them and send them to other teams.
Exactly. Yeah.
I also love that TSM Academy is like just producing players that they refuse to use for some reason, even when they have distinct and obvious needs at those positions. Really
also, You know, a lot of people, they love the classic stories, which always have a feel-good ending. No one likes to tell the stories that don't have a good ending. Like, have you ever heard of my version of the prodigal son? So the real story of the prodigal son in the Bible is there's a guy who's like a landowner and he has a son. And essentially the gist is the son sort of wonders, like, what else is there in life? So the son says, I'm going to take my inheritance now and I'm just going to go and party. And I'm going to like be loose women and drink wine and all sorts of whatever the old school. Yeah, exactly. The old school way to be like a degenerate, basically. And then years later, because this is like a feel-good fucking Hallmark movie, but in like the 4th century BC, he comes back and then he's like, I've sort of fucked up, Dad. But you probably won't even be able to look at me, will you? And then the dad goes like, nah, come on, son, I'll bring you back in. And he brings him back into that sheltered life and reintroduces him to what because the son learned his lesson. I want to talk about the prodigal son the other way around. So there was this org that was just this bunch of fucking degens that never properly were coached. They never actually understood even the way the jungle position works in the fucking game. They failed every world except one when a totally unrelated player just said something racist and that literally just allowed them to get into playoffs one time ever. And then after a while, right, one of their best players, one of their chosen sons was like, you know what? This isn't enough. Like, this isn't the way this is going is fucked up. And he left and he went to Team Liquid and he won championships and he made the finals of MSI. You know, he turned his life around. He had this different chair. But then this is a fucked up prodigal son. He came back to the fucked up degenerate house and was like, can I come back actually? It's more fun just being a degenerate who just comes last place. And they were like, well, come on in, son. And 0-6, that was the end result of the story. So there we go, children. See, not every story has a moral. Some stories are just people make mistakes. You know? And all I'm going to say is this. When I was a young man, don't anyone say anything because you get in trouble if you get associated with this part because it's going to be clipped, right? When I was a young man, someone once told me a piece of wisdom that I will take to my grave. What he told me was this, and I just want you to think about it, whoever I might be referring to here. He told me...
50 years ago? 30?
Something like that. He told me, about when Denmark was formed its independence, right, what he told me was, from Sweden, what he told me was, pussy can drag you further than dynamite can blow you. And you know what? That was just something that was going around my head when I was watching this world. I won't connect it to anyone. I'm just going to say, I was just thinking about that. I was thinking, it can. Yeah. You know what? It's amazing what can happen in that scenario. Yeah.
Well,
how did we end here from talking about how NA is supposed to be better for next year? I'm a little bit, but to round it up a little bit, I think it's important to look at it from the perspective, you know, like where can NA differentiate from the other regions? What kind of tools do they have that other regions don't have? I think if you wanna, what EU did a lot was to bring a lot of new talent in. I think kind of the same happened in China. But that is what we look at from an EU perspective now. Like they brought on a ton of new talent, but there hasn't been, if you look at NA from that perspective, you haven't really seen any way that the region is going or any teams are going. So I think they need to find their niches in kind of how they can do it that way, because I don't think specifically just copying EU or copying LPL is the right way, because there's just not as much talent to work for in terms of solo queue, in terms of player base. So I think they have to find that way.
It's also just the infrastructure. Like, you don't necessarily, like, if you are NA and you identify young players early and they're in high school and over their summer vacations every year, you're sending them to Korea to participate in Korean solo queue and coaching them, right? Like, here's an example. So I'm an organization, and I'm going to do what 100 Thieves did and form a high school team, right, of some of the best players that we can identify. And we say, hey guys, we're going to pay you and put you on a contract so that when you turn 17, we have right of first refusal to offer you an LCS slot. Or an academy slot if we want to, right? And in return, I'm going to pay you. And also, we're going to send you, instead of you flipping burgers at McDonald's, 16-year-old, which you might be doing in your summer job, guess what? We're going to send you to our boot camp facility in Korea and actually coach you and train you all summer instead, and we're going to pay you for that, right?
This is basically, by the way, I know Americans won't know this much. This is actually the way that sports is done in Europe. Like in America, it's more you have the whole college system and that. Like, remember, in Europe, like college sports aren't a thing. Like, no one really gives a fuck about universities. They care about like just pro level play essentially. And maybe some people will watch like an under 21s match, which is kind of like a development team. But basically, like if people don't know, like the story of Lionel Messi is someone went and scouted him in fucking Argentina when he was like, I think he was like a young kid or something. When he wasn't like 9 years old or something mental. And then they brought him to Barcelona, I think when he was like, I'm going to guess like 12, 13. And then they started training him with the youth team. And then eventually he became a pro player for Barcelona. Like basically, think about it, right? The same systems we have in esports have existed in sports. Like buyouts cost millions if the player's already good. If the player's already like known to be good and you're going to sign him, it costs a lot of money because people can sell against his potential. So to counteract that, what you do is you just go to the source. You get the player before anyone like truly knows how good he is. Because as you say, Monty, you'd really figure out he was good in the training process. Like when you took him to Korea and showed, yeah. So that basically, it's going to sound harsh because it's going to be exploitative. Because essentially what you would actually do, by the way, like football clubs do, is you go and sign like 10 kids like that.
Of course.
And of the 10, let's be real, 1 or 2 are maybe going to make it.
Yep.
Like 8 or 9 aren't. But that's unfortunately just the nature of the business. Like 8 or 9 just won't be good enough. Like what you're doing is gambling at the highest stakes here.
I would
it's
say
worth it if you get 1 though. That's the point.
I would say if you have a 20% success rate on this, you would be very successful. That would be a really because remember.
But if you look at the buyouts though, mate, just consider this last off season, the one at the end of season 9, where as we've said on all the talk shows, if anyone's listened, the entire off season was predicated on like the buyout of Vulcan essentially. Like who was going to buy Vulcan because his was like the 1.7 or 1.9 million dollar buyout or whatever. And the logic was like whoever buys him, that will change the effect. When that scenario, that is a ridiculous buyout to be paying for someone whose talent wasn't anywhere close to that level. It's just that that's how rare the good input. That's how rare the good.
Think about it this way: if you hit on 2 out of 10 players, if you can create 2 out of 10 players from an academy system or a training program into LCS caliber players, that's almost half your fucking League of Legends team, right? 2 players is a huge amount for you as an org, especially if you're doing it, once every couple of years. But my point is this: like, there's a lot of things that you could be doing. And honestly, it's not a lot of cost for an org. In the grand scheme of things, training 10 youth players and developing that system probably costs, less than, the equivalent of like 1 average LCS player salary, like $400K a year.
And if people don't know this, like one of the weirdest things ever, if you ever wanted, just like if you ever bored, right, and you just want to play a fun game, just go on Gamepedia or Wikipedia, whatever you use as your like wiki for the League of Legends, and just go to like season 6, season 7, season 8. And all I need you to do is this: just go to like LEC teams, but top teams. I'm talking G2, Fnatic, like Origin in the past, whoever they would have been, Splice, these teams that were like the top ranked teams. Just go, and all you're going to look at is who their sub players are. And this alone will tell you why this method Monty's saying would work. Because by the way, I'm not joking. All the top players right now, like Humanoid, Mickey X, go through the list of them all. They were all listed as the sub for like an LEC team like 3 or 4 years ago, and like never ever got to play. Probably never even got to scrim. They were just listed in case of like emergency, like someone broke the leg or something.
I think that's a fair point, but there are definitely also cases where they just plug in a player because they need a player.
You had to put someone, yes.
So,
but my point is, in that scenario, that means that talent was like, in theory, you could have had those players in your system trying to develop them already,
Yeah, I mean, I see, but I mean, the more important is how much effort you put into developing the players, because that in the end that will determine how well it's going to turn out. So you need to also, I mean, the idea is good, but you also need to make it into action, like who are the people.
No, I don't mean to make them a sub now. I'm saying the fact that those players were even available to be a sub back then shows that if someone had them in a development program, maybe we could have had them as top pros a year earlier. Like maybe they wouldn't have had to wait for so many chances and go to this team and that team and someone get kicked out. Like basically what I'm saying is we already know who the talent is. It's just that we just at the moment just sit there and go, right, see you in 3 years if you ever make it. Like instead, the people who can scout that talent should be bringing them into an org and start and work with them today and get them playing next year, not in 3 years or something,
But keep in mind, like for example, you brought up Mickey as an example. When he started off, I think as a sub on Fnatic, and back then they chose another support over him because at that time, his profile or the support profile that was the best suited to Fnatic at that time, that was just not Mickey. So I think it's obviously easy to look back at it and say, why didn't they just sign him for a longer time? And this is a guy that is now probably the best support, if not then at least the second best in Europe. So I think it's always easy to look at it from the hindsight, but back then I don't think necessarily people just look at him and looked at his play and said, this guy is gonna be that guy in 4 years. So obviously there is some risk to it as well, and also maybe some luck to it. But I think it's a good start, and I think there are a lot of parallels you can draw from the sports world that you can learn from, at least in esports as well, on player development, on how to foster talent, and so forth. So I think it's definitely the right direction. But again, it comes down to what we started out talking about. Do you look at it from a longer perspective, or do you look at it from just short-term success? And I think bringing up NA, they need to bring in that long-term
Yeah.
angle, because that will in the end be what they can kind of look back at and say,
Well-
this is our way. And instead of just, because what the past now 2-3 years they have just been throwing money at high caliber players, and it hasn't really turned out well because for X reasons. So I think definitely the putting more effort into building a system that will help grow talent is the way to go. And
Thing
I
is,
think
though, Kold, like, what I don't even think it's that it didn't work, mate. Like, I think it did work. That's the problem. It's just that you can only get so far if 2 of the players in your team, or 3, have to be native. Like, I think they've done a decent job with imports. Like, look at some of the imports they've had have been amazing. Like, obviously, J, Impact. Like, these players have been Janssen, Bjergsen. These players have been about as good as you could hope for. It's just that, if anything, that proves that that's not the area to just keep looking, because that's only like one solution. They've got to do the other solutions as well.
It's also that it's really easy to point this out now when it comes to Europe and it comes to the LPL, because this has been in process for years. And I think it's really important to talk to express to North American fans that even if you start to see these systems put in place right now, it's going to be 2-3 years before anything happens. And to go back, people might not know this, but a great example is the Shy in China. So in 2014, 2015, the Shy is like a 15-year-old player. Now, he's got 2 years before he can even play professionally, right? But what happens is during that time period, this is when China was getting bodied at Worlds by Korea, because, oftentimes, even though we saw Chinese teams making the final, they would do it by like having the 2 best Korean teams on the opposite side of the bracket or things like that. They weren't really competitive when it came to actually winning the world's title, right? So what they did was they started to form academies in China. And so what they did was they took the Shy and they brought him to China when he was 2 years away from being able to play, even though he was at towards the top of the ladder, and everyone in Korea was like, wow, this guy, he looks really good, like a really promising young prospect.
He already had like the highlight videos and stuff, because there was like one trick in his shit. Yeah, exactly.
And so China took him and they brought him over, and then they just trained him for 2 years. And then all of a sudden he becomes eligible to play. And by 2018, he's on IG and winning Worlds, right? So the thing is that people look at that, but they don't understand that was already happening years in advance in China. Just like, how did we end up here with guys like Kaiser and Shadow and Carzzy and these up-and-coming players on Mad Lions? Well, would we have had them without a more robust EU Master system? Remember, that took years to develop, right? It's cool that we're seeing all these up-and-coming players out of Europe right now, but that's only because EU Masters is there. Okay? And without anything in North America, you're still going to be 2-3 years out, even if something is going to change next year for that to happen. And we started seeing like Cloud9 is starting to run like their youth programs. Like we see 100 Thieves next, like the teams are starting to do it, but it needs to be like an infrastructural implementation. But even then, it's not going to happen overnight. And people just look at China and Europe, but they don't recognize that this process took a long time to actually result in these players coming up.
Anyway, let's just talk about specific games and then playoffs now. Sorry, made them wait long enough. Because here's the thing: as much as people think like, "Oh, you're just flaming them," like it's way worse the other way. Imagine that, knowing they went 0-6 if you tuned in and we only talked about it for 5 minutes. That'd be more of a fucking blue balls, wouldn't it?
So Thorin, so Kold, just to catch you up to speed and to catch our audience up to speed, Thorin has been on the TSM edging philosophy, which is that he was just edging, like he wanted them to win LCS so that then their inevitable, when they flew too close to the sun with their wax Icarus wings, it would be more satisfying. They would drop from a higher height, right? Little did we know that they would go 0-6, because this is literally like the best / worst thing that could have happened. So I'll admit it, Thorin. I'll admit it. I was a little concerned when they got seeded into that group because I was like,
it looks like they're going to get at least one win, sure. Like, maybe like Fnatic fucks up and gives them a win.
Not only that, but
they'd get like one.
There's a world where after seeing LGD's play-in performance that they make quarterfinals, right? That world certainly exists.
It was never in my heart, but yeah, it was a possibility, certainly.
I admit I was mopping my brow, I was sweating a little bit when I was like, oh shit, LGD's bet. Oh shit, LGD's in their group. I was sweating a little bit, but God, did they ever deliver on that 0-6? Not only that, but the creme de la creme, the pièce de résistance, Thorin, was the first pick Zilean in their last game.
To lose the tournament. Please, sir. This pate is too rich. I believe my liver is getting gout now. Another slice anyway. Delicious. And not only that, by the way, the very same Zilean just got fucking... Oh, yeah, he lost both games with it.
Yes.
The Zilean also, here's the best part, here's the spoiler, right? The only premise of picking that is to set the rest of your team up right. Never could, because we always just mega behind in every fucking game. As I said, literally would fucking happen. Like, what people don't get is this. That's not about Bjergsen. I mean, listen, there's second and third order considerations, like why the fuck is Bjergsen picking that at the Worlds, and the fact that he picks it in the last game also implies, by the way, that at the end he still thought it was good. But actually, that pick is more about any of the region, not about Bjergsen the player, because the fact that he got tricked into thinking that was going to fucking work shows how bad the NA mid laners he was playing were. Like, that is ridiculous. Like, dude, Kold, no European fucking players ever arriving at Worlds and doing those picks. Come on. Mid laner, come on.
No, of course not. I mean, I think maybe in the past when the game was a little bit more slow, but nowadays it's just not a thing, especially with how like very set the meta is at the Worlds. Like, it's very much about using early lane priors to snowball the jungle, and then seeing how they like their read on it, which two times with a Cillian pick, and then one time with the Blanc, which I think does not work as well in this meta when it's a lot about, especially not when you pair it with a Graves. So I think just the drafting was very weird, and a little disrespectful to the meta, and especially I think the Eastern teams have been so good at showcasing why you can't do this, and then when you see it punished as well. I think the first game he played Cillian, he was down double CS to the set mid, and then the second time he got solo killed by CA on Orianna. So I mean, it's very clear that this is he kind of got fake information from playing in NA.
Yes.
But even then, I feel like at least they must have got, like, we don't have information obviously about what happened, but they must have gotten some kind of information from scrims that this is actually a pick that can work.
Right.
Else it just makes absolute zero sense. So I'll give them the benefit of the doubt that this is actually something that they must have tried out in practice and see it work out. But when I look at it, it just seems really like a bad decision, and
Yes.
And honestly, just a lack of understanding how the meta is. I think that is probably the biggest thing for me. That all of them can't identify that this is actually just a bad decision to play this champion. So I think that is the biggest problem, at least from how I see it.
There's two things here, like Monty. One, think of all the, like, what's beautiful about anything to do with Bjergsen or TSM is those fans have just 24/7 scrutinized every move that Jensen does, almost on the level of like all those LeBron haters who like don't even acknowledge he's like a top 10 player or something, like, never mind, like the best, like they're just mindset against it. Well, obviously all the arguments they've ever made against Jensen now look stupid as fuck. Like, remember those other ones? Like, what? He's not that good. All he did is just win on Orianna. Anyone can play that. Anytime you feel like it, Bjergsen, just go ahead and lock in the most basic bitch fucking mid laner of all time. And you prefer to just do two pocket picks that are shit and lose the game. Well, you're a bad player fundamentally then. So that's that done. We checked that one off. The other one is this. I don't know if you heard this, Monty, but at the beginning of Worlds, I know Yankos said this on stream, so it was implied, like a few teams thought this. Apparently at the beginning of the Worlds, like in scrims, apparently TSM was like doing half decent, and people were saying actually they're looking in good shape. Right? I'm also sick and tired of that. Every single year, year TSM has ever gone to Worlds as a number 1 seed, it's always the same story. They either themselves, behind the scenes, leak that like we're winning scrims against Asian teams to like hype themselves, or even better, they sometimes just leak the scrim itself as a VOD, like, oh, how did this get out there? Magically always them winning against the Asian teams. Never them getting dumpster noticed at 5 minutes. So that's how you know it was totally legit, that was a leak, right? That if that story happens every year, you go to Worlds, you boot camp. In the boot camp, you're doing awesome. You're winning all these games. You're winning against this team, and then in the actual tournament, you always fail. Your practice is absolute shit. You don't even know what practice is. Like what you're doing in practice isn't showing up in the server. So I'm going to go ahead and assume, because it can't be over this many Worlds, it's not some massive conspiracy. There can't be like 50 Asian teams collaborating in some secret group called like haha fuck TSM, because first of all I have that Facebook group. No, because like in this scenario, like it'd be too many pieces to collaborate. Like they're obviously not purposely losing scrims to show TSM that TSM suck. Like this means that TSM probably is half decent when they get to Worlds, but something goes drastically wrong from whatever they think they're learning in their scrims and whatever happens in the actual stage games, because this has happened like every year, it feels like now. I hear the same like behind the scenes happen, and the results always shit. So something's going wrong with the coaching as far as I can tell.
I think at least like going into it, I think there was like some kind of excitement for them, at least because they changed so much during the NA playoffs that they were suddenly starting to play more proactively. They looked like a team. You know, when we look at the best teams right now, it's all of the teams can carry from every position basically. Like I think that is what League has grown to in season 10, that every position can carry the game. And I think that was kind of what TSM was trying to implement in NA, that, you know, we want to enable that top laner to carry, something that we don't see much in NA at all. And we have seen Bjergsen carry games, we've seen Double carry games, so we know they're capable of it. So I think from that perspective, it was positive going into it. But then when we saw the initial game they played against Fnatic, and they gave Fnatic literally the 2 champions that they just showcased that these are the champions they can beat G2 in a best of 5. I think it's just completely disrespectful not to remove it from the game. So when they gave Fnatic the Lucian Evelyn combo, for me it was just like a huge head scratch, and I don't know what goes into that decision, because to me it just seems like a really poor prep for Fnatic and how to win against them as a team. So there are definitely some issues within the team, but as an outsider, it's hard to directly say what it is. But you can see it in at least from that game, it was very clear to me that this is a team that did not prep well for Fnatic specifically.
Yeah. I mean, I question, I don't know. I question a lot of their prep. I mean, it's hard to say, because I thought they wouldn't be running this Zilean pick at Worlds just because it's punishable on like a global stage, right? But it's also the ways in which they lost the games. I think even just you look at the games of versus Gen.G. In the first game, they have no lane priority and they just get completely out-rotated and out-macroed on the map. And in the second game, they try and draft for lane priority and they get Bjergsen onto the Lucian pick and they start to get pressure, and then they just completely throw the game through their poor objective control. And like, this really just it goes back to all of the issues that they had when they were winning the LCS, which is the what we were talking about at the time. These picks do not work on a global stage. You cannot run these picks and get the same kind of advantages that you're getting in NA. And the second problem is this: they were inted into repeatedly. And so they're used to being at an objective and the other team just completely inting and throwing the game. And that doesn't also happen on the world stage. So it's like they didn't know how to be proactive. They didn't know how to pick the lane bullies. And then when they did pick the lane bullies, they didn't know how to convert those leads, because their strategy of just stand there in front of Dragon or Baron wasn't working any longer, because no one was just committing suicide into them.
A lot of the time, actually, I was paying a little bit close attention to how they played it out, and a lot of times it was actually them, when they actually got the leads. It was not in every game, but especially that Lucian game from Bjergsen, it was them actually overforcing instead of taking. You know, they just took every opportunity they had to push the lead, and then they were playing against opponents that were good at punishing this, and then they were just overforce and initially throw the game at Baron. So I think it was actually a lot of it was how poorly they played mid game when they had a lead. I saw a lot of flaws in how they played it. So I think maybe the stress got to them a little bit. That is usually a common thing in mid game if your team is not if they're overstressed of just getting the win, then a lot of times you just play too fast in a way. And that is kind of what I saw from them. So I think when they lost that game, it was pretty apparent that they will just they are not good enough to get past groups.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really sad to see what happened there. I think the other NA teams performed at least to a halfway decent level. I do find it interesting that the number one seed was the one in, ostensibly the easiest group out of any of these NA teams, was the one to struggle the most. When we look at Liquid and FlyQuest, at least they did have some redemption towards the end. They went 3-3, and their players showed that they could at least hold their own nominally on a global level. So it wasn't all doom and gloom, and that's what I also find funny.
I mean, Fly might end up being one of the only teams to have a win against what might be the world champions. It's not bad.
Yeah,
that might end up looking even better by the end of the tournament.
It was a meaningless game, basically, but yes, I do think
it's actually funny. Like both of them have one thing in common, and it's that both of the games that they won against, I guess, teams that on paper look superior, is that they both pulled out level 1 strategies. And I think it's actually something we will hopefully see more of at Worlds. It seems like something that is so. The way I see it is like if you have a matchup where it's maybe 30-70 or 20-80 matchup, then if you are proactive level 1, you can if you actually end up winning the level 1,
even it up for yourself. Yeah,
suddenly it's a 50-50 game, and then
yes,
then your odds are way better. So I think at least so when I was working with Brox at Worlds, it was something that me and him spent a lot of time working on, because in a best of 1, it's just something that can easily turn around the game in your favor, and something that is not utilized enough, especially for the weaker teams. Because let's be real, if FlyQuest play against top in, let's say, 100 games, maybe they win 5.
yes.
Maybe they win even less, but if they pull the trigger level 1 and do something practically that actually happened, suddenly the enemy support doesn't have flash, and they can 2v2 kill, and the other teams are doing mistakes, and then suddenly you're in the driver's seat, and it's just so much easier to play League when you're ahead. So I think that was very interesting, at least from like a coaching perspective, how much impact level 1 can actually have on a game.
Well, it's especially easy to play, or it's especially good to play League of Legends when you're ahead, when you get a strong level 1, and then your draft enables that. If you have a Lilia who can, play off the pressure and counter jungle very efficiently, if you have hard engage or an ability to roam with the Blitzcrank like Ignar had on the map, right? These are all really good factors for extending leads. And it goes back to, I think people don't recognize that FlyQuest's coaching staff is actually quite good, because this level 1, these bespoke level 1 strategies are also how they beat Cloud9 in the LCS playoffs. They had excellent, like literally their level 1 strategies were based off of games that they played against Cloud9 during the regular split LCS, where they found weaknesses and then they exploited those at level 1 in their playoff series in summer, which was really impressive to see if you had seen the previous games. And FlyQuest has had these strong level 1s. And think about this. FlyQuest is a team that has to play in a very specific way around Power of Evil. And it's not a bad way, but it just demands that you kind of play a certain style. And the fact that they got as far as they did, the fact that they beat top, think about this, they beat top with Wild Turtle and Solo. That's impressive. That's very impressive. Like when you have basically one good lane and you're still able to pull out that win,
and you're even outmatched at that. Like you have all 3 main laners are the underdog player in the matchup. Yes. That's impressive. You can win that game in 2020.
Yeah,
and I think a lot of credit goes to the staff and the players for pulling out the level 1. And I think especially Ignar has always shown in the years that he has been a player that if he has agency in the game to take over on gems like Blitzcrank, I think Leona, like the Leona Worlds game against S3E17 was also a game that comes to mind. Like then he is just a guy that can take over the game. So a lot of credit to them. I think those are the kind of strategies that you should be looking towards if you are the worst team on paper, or if you don't think you just can beat the team straight up in a normal kind of game sense. So hopefully we will see that more at Worlds.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. We've talked about this repeatedly, the importance of level ones right now, and how easily it plays into the rest of the game. League of Legends is so dominated by lane pressure and laning phases these days that little advantage can snowball an entire game. Like it changes the entire like face of the laning phase in a way that is very difficult to recover from, because even a small like 2,000 gold lead at 15 minutes right now is incredibly powerful. Teams have gotten so good across the board at changing that advantage into a win that everything else before that becomes incrementally more important, right? It's impressive. And I also hope that we see more of these strategies. First off, because they're fun, and I think they tell a lot of the story about how teams see the game and how they see their opponent's weaknesses and where they're trying to play. I think stylistically it gives you a ton of information.
I agree.
So we want to talk about some of the quarterfinal matchups. I think that's an exciting topic.
I even think we can tie this in, by the way, because one thing actually I was thinking of when Kold was talking there about the level ones, because that was something from watching LPL I noticed was like something that could have a massive effect on games coming into Worlds. The team I want to see do that is Fnatic. Like if Fnatic want a chance to go further in this tournament, look at this. Look at the formula they've used for the last 2 years. Whenever they were actually a top team in Europe, they were always like one of the best early game teams. They always actually had sometimes creative aspects like this at the very beginning of the game, the setups they would do. So like to me, if I'm them, learn the lesson of FlyQuest. Like you don't want to go into a matchup against a team where like all their laners almost are better than yours. Like that's just in that scenario. If you play out those games in a best of 5, you're going to lose. So like, why not throw in this element and increase the variance? Just go for something creative, because if you give like Selfmade, for example, an advantage early at the beginning of the game, he can carry the game, of course.
Also, the way they've been drafting around Selfmade too, and really just making him the focal point of the team.
Yeah,
you really could get that advantage, start to get the invades early and prop him up, and then support him with the rest of your team composition like they've been doing. That's why we've seen utility mages from Fnatic. That's why we've seen so much Senna from Fnatic. These are things that really play to their strengths. And if anyone should be able to deal with inventive level ones, surely Mithy should be able to come up with some good shit for Fnatic level ones, right?
I mean, it's a very interesting topic, because what you alluded to was that Fnatic see themselves or sees top as the favorites, that they are outmatched or that top is better than them. And I'm a little bit unsure if that is actually true. From knowing some of the players, maybe their ego
delusional. Delusional.
Maybe their ego is that high that they actually see themselves on the same level. So maybe they are not looking too much into it. But one thing especially that the level ones are doing is that right now, since the meta is so jungle focused, one camp lead suddenly translates into two jungle camp leads. Then you have 3 leads. Then you have a level lead. Then you are the ones taking the objectives, and then that just snowballs super hard. That there's kind of no way back for the enemy jungler. And I think Selfmade as a guy is probably the best jungler from Europe at taking over the game if he gets a lead. So if I was a coach of Fnatic, this was definitely something I would like to see from them. But we will see. I think a lot of it comes down to their kind of that mindset going into the series, because I think top is heavy favorites. I think hopefully Fnatic can show at least one good game, but in reality it looks very much on paper like a 3-0 to me. So I definitely think they should shake things up and get some cheese strats in there. To me, it's not actually it's not even a cheese strat. It is actually like a legitimate strategy to try to disrupt the game from the get-go. So I think that is definitely the right approach.
Put it this way, I could what you're saying is plausible. Like, there are definitely top teams where if they win a few scrims, they'll think, "Oh, I'm not actually a fit underdog," even though on paper, obviously, everyone would have top as the big favorite. But put it this way, if we want them to have a chance to win, I hope that they do understand they're the underdog, like you're saying, and mix it up a bit. Because put it this way, if they don't, then spoiler, Reckless is just going to end up like one of RNG's mid laners crying on stage in China. Straight fire if you know the reference. Look it up. Look up Gamepedia, type in crying. Look it up. There you go.
It's actually interesting. I feel like at this world specifically, Reckless has like a different vibe to him. I don't know if you have recognized this as well, but he seems more joyful in a sense, like he's smiling a lot. Usually he's very, very serious. So I don't know. It's always something that I'm looking at when I'm looking at players.
Trying to
on
get a
stage.
sense of where they look like they're mentally at.
Yeah, I think he seems like, it seems like, at least from the outside, that he's mentally at a right place or at a good state, and usually that puts him up for success. So I think if only based on that, and also just based on how he's playing, him and Hilly has been playing really well. I think I actually haven't seen him lose lane a single time, and a lot of times they've also played weak side. So I think it's looking good for them, and this is probably a time where they will go in as an underdog, and I think Fnatic going in as an underdog is usually booting up well for them, at least from past experience. So let's see how it goes. I'm like deep inside, I'm always cheering a little bit for you. So I mean, you know the drill. So I hope they're gonna beat them. But realistically, and if you look at it from an objective standpoint, it should be very top favored.
Well, actually, one thing I do want to say, like, obviously, I meme on Fnatic, but that's mainly contrasted against G2. Like, they think they're as good as G2, which they're obviously not, as the fucking, well, just the fabric of reality is fundamentally shown that's not the case. So it's not even like I need my opinion on that, do you? Like, I'll just look for a bunch of trophies. You want the fucking Ghost Town in the Fnatic trophy cabinet. Like, as far as I can tell, they were all tied to a piece of string on Caps' leg when he walked out the fucking door, just jangling down the street now. Like, they haven't got any athletes. So anyway, the point is this, though. It's bizarre because it's like I said on Twitter, Fnatic at Worlds are the anti-TSM. Because what happens with TSM every year, with the exception of the year where they had RNG and Samsung, where actually I don't think they should have gotten out of that group anyway. It's just that in their minds they should have. Every other year, TSM typically gets a group where it's like, all right, yeah, this team could beat them, but in theory they're supposed to get out. Like even this group here, if you're the number one seed and if you're actually just decent, you should have had chances. I mean, Fnatic showed you. Fnatic beat Gen.G and LGD. Like, this was doable if you were a competent team. Whereas what happens is TSM always then underwhelms and just plays badly against teams they could have gotten out against. Fnatic actually usually does the opposite because especially since in the last few years they haven't come in as number one seed, Fnatic nearly always gets a group where actually they have two other competent potential playoff teams in their group. And so this year and last year, like you look at those groups and you're like, I could see a world where like RNG or LGD gets out instead. Like, you know, maybe they're not going to make it. They always do make the cut though. Like, actually, they've shown themselves being pretty clutch in those groups. Like, that second week, they always deliver the goods. So, even though I meme on them as players, like, actually, their track record's way more impressive in that regard. Like, I wouldn't, if on paper, it wouldn't have been the end of the world if they'd gone out of some of these groups.
Here's a question for you, Thorin. If we bring back our conversation from last week about what would happen if Bjergsen was on Fnatic at Worlds, given the TSM underperformance and the Fnatic overperformance, does it cancel each other out? I mean, I really want to know the answer to that question.
I mean, the reason why that topic, by the way, is so fucking delicious is because I'm one of the people who for years has tried to argue that in team sports, you can't just judge the player by the end result of the team because, like, the team can obviously overwhelm your individual performance. That's why, I know people don't believe it, but some of the really great players in League of Legends just never were on the top teams as they never had the championships. Like, I'm sure people know until he came to the G2 with Caps, Jankos never won a fucking LEC title, ever. Are you going to tell me in those years he wasn't a top player? Of course he was amazing, but he just wasn't on the right team. So I'm totally in favour with the idea that you can be amazing, but your team can perform. Problem is, if you're one of the fans, it's most people who believe that, like, you know, after, say, like 1 or 2 times, it must be you as well. So, for example, TSM fans loved to laugh at Doublelift all those years where he didn't get out of groups. Even when he was in Team Liquid, they laughed at him. Well, by that logic, Bjergsen's one of the biggest failures of all time. He isn't, by the way. He's still a very good player. I do think he has been somewhat underwhelming at Worlds. I'll throw that in. But even then, it's not like, here's the difference between Bjergsen and other players. He never, like, hard-inted. He never, like, chain-fed whole games. Some players do that when they fail. He just underwhelmed. Like, he didn't pop off, basically. You want to see him have games like Caps does, where he just takes over the game and can win you it. So, in that sense, like, I do think Bjergsen is to blame for some of it, but, like, it's just their own fans set them up on that one, mate. You can't say that, like, oh, you're a failure if you don't get out of groups, and then your own guy does it, like, fucking 5 times. Are you kidding me? Get out of my face.
But I mean, from if you look at Bjergsen as a player, then he would definitely fit into the role.
I think it'd be awesome in Fnatic.
Absolutely. I mean, he's probably one of the most stable players. I mean,
Yes.
maybe there's even the discussion of whether or not the two carries or like mid and ADC Reckless and Bjergsen not too stable in a way.
As it might,
that was
yeah, it might,
in
the
a
clash.
hypothetical
Yeah, agreed.
world where they were on the same team, that's a little bit uncertain. I think you can't take away the fact that Nemesis and Selfmade have been playing together for so long, and they are working. Even though maybe in game it doesn't show that they're working well together, they have kind of accepted the two guys' play styles. So like Nemesis is
You
okay
say
with
that,
the-
right? I agree with you
I at least
now.
think
If
so.
we're talking about this moment, Kold, I'll agree with you.
Yeah.
But in my opinion, kind of like how TSM had to change once they got to playoffs to actually win LCS. In my opinion, Fnatic already figured that out after fucking playoffs. Like, they spent the whole year thinking Nemesis is supposed to be some superstar mid laner, and then they were making like Selfmade replace Broxer. Like, in a world where of the two, it's like Selfmade helps Nemesis. That team is shit. That's the team that almost didn't make playoffs. The team where they play, like Monty was saying, draft around and play around Selfmade. That team looks fucking really good, actually. Like, that's who Fnatic looks like now. So I agree with you today. I think they figured it out. But I actually think they had that like dynamic off when they first came in the team, though.
I mean, it's I get your what you're saying, but I mean it can also be from like a team perspective. You know, maybe we have to change up the way we play because if we want to be the best possible team we can be, then we need to be able to play different styles. I think beforehand they in the start of summer they were playing with Selfmade as the main carry. You know, I think. I don't know if you recall, but there were games where he played Graves and they were playing Soraka bot lane where they would just funnel all gold onto him. So it's not like they didn't try that before. It's just they have set their way now, and I think at least from the outside it looks like they have a good relationship between the two of them, so that they both of them understand each other and they accept that this is the way we play and they buy into it. So I think maybe you wouldn't have the same from Bjergsen in that sense. Maybe he would like to be the carry. I actually when I'm saying this, I actually think Bjergsen would be able to adapt to whatever whatever is needed because he's a guy that just wants to win. So I think it wouldn't be a problem.
Put it this way, based on things.
It's an interesting take, you know.
Put it this way, I've literally heard from people who know Bjergsen, like to this date, that actually, if anything, they think that's one of his biggest problems in TSM, is that he tries to be like the best teammate by just being a band-aid for the others. And like sometimes I would like him to do this. Like in this particular world, just pick the strongest champion for you and take over the game, mate. That's what would have been best for you. Like this stupid shit of like, I'm going to play Zillion, so then this guy in this other role, it's like that never worked. Like that plan was a bad idea, which that's where actually trying to be a good teammate can actually ruin you if you're the potential star player. Like you have to take, it's like this. It's like if you're a parent, the best way you can help your kid is take care of your own life first. Like if your job's gone to shit, your health's gone to shit, like you can't help anyone at that point in time. You have to be in a good position before you can help the other person. So I think, in my opinion, when you're a star player, it's the same. I know normally we try and talk stars down because too many of them are the other way. They're too selfish, you know, like they just want their pick even if it doesn't make sense in the comp. I feel like someone like Bjergsen, because of TSM's problems over the years, I think he went too far the other way. I want this guy to come back to being a star player.
Well, also just knowing him as a person, he's like extremely introspective, extremely like he's a pretty easygoing, thoughtful guy, and so I think his
Shia told me he was easygoing as fuck. You know, he's really cool to be around. He likes to make space for people, make them feel included, comfortable. He likes to share out the objectives around the map. No, whatever. Keep going.
He just, in my experience, he doesn't have a huge ego, which honestly in this scenario is kind of a problem because
so actually maybe he would work with Reckless there, Kold, because obviously Reckless's enormous ego would just, you know, it would just go right up to where Bjergsen is. He's got a tiny little ego. Together the two of them would be fine.
Yeah, I just think like in Bjergsen's case, he's probably too willing to give up, like to give up control or to try and like help
perfect
his
TSM mid
teammates.
laner.
So
I get it. He means like give up like control. That's it.
Yeah, give up control or like try and play a different role within the team so that he can help his teammates to address flaws in the game instead of being as demanding that the team play around him. So I think it's really just knowing him, that's certainly a scenario that it could go, and perhaps that isn't the kind of attitude that TSM needs in order to be effective.
It's a very interesting conversation because it goes very hand in hand with, like, for example, right now when we see that the jungle meta is it's so based around the jungler right now, that the lanes are supposed to play for the jungler. If you go back in time, at least from I guess from back when Monty was casting, it was all about, you know, the jungler would always support the lanes. It was that was just how the role was. So back then it was you I mean, a lot of people discuss the jungle role as a dog role, you know, and it has been for some seasons, but right now it's very much a carry role. And if you have a very selfless mindset as a jungler, it's actually hard for you to take over the game, because you need to be selfish in a sense that you need to draw people to help you, or you need to have people play for you. And I think it's very apparent that some players, so for example, we see a guy like Jankos maybe struggle a little bit because this is the way that he has approached the game from a G2's perspective. And I guess some of the criticism he has received is that he doesn't the G2 laners are not playing for him as much as we see from other teams like Damwon, for example. So I think it's definitely it's in an ideal world you would have players that can both be selfish but also be selfless depending on
Yes.
a situation. But that is just not, we don't live
Yes, of
in
course.
an ideal world. So being able to shift whenever needed, I think, is definitely something that can be really important within a team. But also just the teammates accepting that, you know, maybe we have to change our style, and then it's okay to be selfish, because a lot of times people that are selfish are seen as, you know, you're a bad teammate because you're
Course.
too
Yeah.
selfish. But in reality, sometimes you actually need to take that responsibility within a team for the team to be successful. So I think that whole discussion on players, I think, is very interesting and something that should be probably discussed more. And I think at least from right now. So for example, right now when I was working with Broxa for a couple of weeks, it was very apparent that this was kind of his perspective. You know, he from his time in NA, that he plays a very selfless way, and in the current meta, that is just not the right approach. So I think this is something a lot of players are dealing with. This balance between being selfish and
By the
selfless.
way, if you look at the bracket for the playoffs, I think it ties into what you're saying, mate. Arguably, the best junglers in the tournament are all the playoff junglers. Look,
Yep.
like every single playoff team has a good jungler, every single one.
Yeah, we discussed
Like
that
as much
last
as,
week.
as much as people want to flame like pure shit, yeah, he's only bad for career top level. He's still a fucking good player, obviously.
I mean, that's what we said last week, is like Klid is probably like a bottom 2 jungler in playoff teams, and all the teams that we expected to make playoffs were the ones who made playoffs. So it's weird that we could say, like, I think Piocic is definitely the worst.
That position is amazing for this playoff lineup. Like, look how good the fucking matchups are here. They could
And
be amazing.
I think we have to talk about how we got here to the jungle carry meta, because it ties back to the XP changes that Riot made in the jungle, right? Because when that happened, it was clear that we were going to move into more of a carry jungle meta. But what was unclear to me at the time, and what I've realized now, is how insane that snowball is. Because here's the thing, like you were alluding to earlier, Kold, when you were talking about jungle, like advantage, it's not that hard to get a 2 or 3 level advantage from a jungler advantage on the enemy jungle right now. And that affects everything about the game. It affects a team, you know, even if the rest of the team is doing quote unquote well, or is even or close to even, it makes it very hard to take dragons or barons because of the smite difference. Makes a difference. Like if you have more items in the jungle position, or you're playing a champion that scales very well with levels, to have those team fights. But because of that XP advantage and the way that pressure on the map works, if you start taking 1 or 2 extra camps, that translates eventually into like a couple levels, and that is huge at this level. I mean, that is at the level of competition we're talking about, that kind of advantage is very large, and that's part of the knock-on effect of increasing the jungle experience overall.
And then again, you know, like if a jungler suddenly gets a 2-3 level lead, then he can start actually 1v1ing or pressuring you so hard on side lanes that you can't catch farm on sides, and you have to you need to find another way to play the map to even get XP and get the gold. So I definitely agree with you. Another thing was also the change to the catch-up XP. But I think those two are the two reasons why it changed like it did. But I think a big, like, a guy that shows exactly how maybe is doing it a little bit too much is SOFM. I think he got a lot of recognition during this Worlds for his play, but and kind of how I see it is he's kind of playing his own mini game within the game, and that's like his own mini jungle game of, you know, how many camps can I get, you know, and he's counting them. And I even saw an interview that he was like he was not tracking them in terms of, you know, writing down when the camps are spawning, but in his head, you know, he just had them down on lockdown. And it's interesting to see, because the specific style that he is playing right now, uh, if you go back in time and you would see a jungler play like this, you would instantly call him like, you would say he's playing poorly. You know, why is he playing so much for himself? You know, he's
Oh,
leaving
we
his mid.
did. Like, the joke is, it's that guy Clearlove. If you remember back in the day, everyone used to flame him because he just farmed all the time. And at the time, it used to be like you were saying, junglers played for the laners, and your job is to gank, not to farm and become a carry yourself. Yeah.
So I think it's just like this change is a testament to like how much the game actually changes over time, and how important it is for every single player that is playing the game to be able to adapt to what is thrown at you. Because in the end, like, players don't have a say in how the game is gonna turn out,
Sure.
you know. So you need to be able to adapt, and that's why this discussion about being selfish or selfless as a player is really important, to have both qualities within you, so that you can play. And also, I guess, the ability and skill to be able to play certain styles, or different styles. That this is the way to go in the modern league.
You know, the real tragedy, of course, Kold, is it's your replacement who should have been thriving now. This would have been your fucking era, Xerxes. You could have actually been ruled like the fucking ancient Persian emperor, whatever the fuck. Like, you were playing Farmville way back in the day, Maggie. Where are you? This is your world. Where are you?
I'll tell you this much. I think if I was to play right now, I would definitely have the brain to play, but my hands probably wouldn't work as well as some of the other guys. So I think that's probably where the biggest problem is.
That's my problem too. That's my problem too, Kold.
But okay, true. I was hoping for I was at least hoping for a little bit, a little bit of, you know. I mean, you weren't that bad, you know, like. But I guess Thorin is just that guy that.
No, yeah, actually, listen. Last year, the sad thing is, it was the worst split. It was the summer one, but at the beginning of the summer one, you actually were pretty good. Like, that was when I think you were at your peak. You know, you were doing pretty well back then.
I think as a player, at times you need like to have an honest view on yourself as a player. And for me, at least, I have always been good when my team have been playing well. But when my team wasn't playing well, then I was not playing well. And I think I don't have, like, so for example, if you put me in the shoes of Selfmade, I can't do, or I couldn't do what Selfmade is doing. And I think in how the game is evolving, you need to have players that can do that. And if I don't see myself being able to execute the way he can, for example, then I don't see the reasoning for me to keep keep being a player. Maybe there's just better things for me to do, because back in the day, it was the game was more based on your brain, at least from a jungle perspective. But nowadays, it's the mix of both. And if I can help teach some of the guys that can actually execute the things that are needing to take place within a game, then that will probably lead to more success. So I think you have to be, at least, as I think a lot of, actually, this is a thing that I think more players that are getting older and are maybe declining a little bit in their play should take an honest look on themselves and see, you know, what if they want to keep playing because they love playing, then that is all. But maybe having ambitions, you know, like a lot of people have the ambition, you know, I want to win worlds, or I want to go to worlds, or I want to win EU, or I want to win NA. But if you don't have the skill to go there, then maybe you should reevaluate. But that's a whole different discussion.
I honestly don't see how you could go to NA with any kind of reasonable expectation at any point in the future that you are going to be competitive on the world stage. So I think we just all have to accept that people are going to go and get paychecks and have some fun fiestas in North America and then go to Worlds and get boomed. I think that is, I don't understand why people don't already expect that. I don't even understand the outrage from the North American fan base repeatedly. It's not like it was ever any different, right? They've never known anything but failure. So why do you keep getting mad?
I mean, the best case was that C9 in what year where they went to the semis?
Season 8.
That was the
Yeah, and they did beat a Korean team to do that. So it wasn't
That was legit.
It wasn't totally not legit, but that was an outlier result, as was CLG like making the MSI finals randomly. But I think clearly over the last few years, it's just been a competition between China, Korea, and Europe, and we've seen Europe increasing in level over time and be contenders right now. And I think we should, talking about Fnatic, I think it's unlikely that they're going to be able to beat Top. That is an unfortunate draw for them in terms of the group stage. But I think G2 is probably the favorite against Gen.G, given what I've seen. G2 had I think, a more difficult group. And Gen.G also, I think, displayed a lot of weaknesses. We could say the same thing about G2 with kind of Jankos not having the best group stage ever. But he has probably one of the least scary junglers to go against in this playoff bracket in Klid out of all the rest of the teams. Like Pioshik would probably be less scary, but there are other aspects of DRX that make them more formidable. But I think this is G2 entering as a favorite against Gen.G, and we all know how good G2 is in best of 5. So I see this as probably G2 kind of with a free ticket to the semis.
What do you think, Kold?
No, I mean, I agree. I think we always, whenever we discuss G2, we always bring up the best of 5 aspect. So now is the time for them to show it, right? Like during the group stage, they had up and down performances, especially the 2 last games against Suning. I think it's hard to take too much away from it, since the games, obviously it mattered getting first seed, but in their head maybe it didn't matter too much. But stylistically, I think this is probably the absolute best draw they could get. And if you're an EU fan, you should be very happy about this, because as you said, it in a meta that is so jungle focused, this is probably the best possible draw. I think one thing that we should probably look out for a lot in the series is how well the teams are going to be playing around the bottom side of the map. I think that is going to be what is going to determine the game, because the games where we have seen Gen.G perform really well, it's often how they play through mid jungle control into bot side. So I think a lot of it will come down to that. And in the past, G2 always kind of adapts in a way where they either try to attack the enemy strength, or then they just completely counteract and use, for example, Wonder as a tool to carry the game, which I also think could be a possibility. So
well,
I'm a little bit excited
I just see that G2 has more weapons, like you're saying. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Because you look at this Gen.G lineup, and frankly, both of their solo lanes at Worlds have kind of underwhelmed me. Rascal and BDD. And so, like you're saying, I think playing through mid jungle into bot, where Ruler and Life have been the overwhelming strength of this roster, but it's not like it's going to be a walk in the park for them. Perks and Mickey have had a phenomenal group stage. They've been incredibly strong. Yes. And you look at Caps and Wonder, and I think both of those players are better than the solo laners of Gen.G. So it seems really difficult for Gen.G stylistically to exploit G2. I don't know.
Also, of all Korean teams, like, this is the one you want stylistically. This is way more in the vein of the boring style of Korean team that plays the same way every time. Like, which, by the way, is what G2 was basically the nightmare of last year when they played SKT and Damwon, etc. So, like, the other teams might have been trickier. I feel like this is the most winnable one. Like, I do think there's a world where if BDD and Klid do super well, they've got a chance. But, like, I actually think Wonder is the player that will be the decision maker. Like, I think he is way better than Rascal. So, like, I could see a lot happening in this series if they play well through him. And as you say, in terms of the bot is definitely dangerous for Gen.G, especially because right now is probably the perfect meta for Ruler. Like, he just looks primo on all the AD carries they pick right now. But as you say, like if anything, coming into Worlds, actually G2's bot lane had been a bit off for most of the split. Obviously, in Perks' case, you give mixed anyway in circumstances. But by the time they arrived at Worlds, both looked way better. Like Perks started to come online as playoffs went, but Mickey X looked really good in the group stage.
Great.
I think that's a rare example where I wouldn't hate it if someone has Gen.G winning the series. I think it could be a very interesting series. But I'll take G2 as like a slight favorite to win it.
I have them winning 3-1 in the series.
I think that would be my prediction as well.
I think they're just better overall. And if there's one thing that this Worlds has shown us so far is that it seems very predictable in a way.
Yes.
The teams that has gone through has been the teams that we expected, and if that is continuing into the best of series, then I think we will see G2 kind of take on Gen.G pretty easily.
It's actually scary how predictable this was. I think the one thing that kind of threw predictions into a weird place was LGD's play-in performance made them look potentially weaker than they were. But if you were to like rank the teams, maybe you put Rogue above PSG Talon, like there might be some discrepancies, but in terms of who got out of these groups, basically who you would think. Maybe not in first or second place, but G2 is always one of those teams that throws random best of ones, and so there was always the possibility that they get out in second place of that group, and even then it took them to the tiebreaker to even get to that point, so it was incredibly close. But yeah, everything else, basically exactly what you would have thought coming in. Very weird.
It's actually, I wanted to know something actually, because you two are both like draft wizards, so maybe you can give me an angle on this. Right, one of the weirdest things one of the things that makes G2, in my opinion, so good in best of fives is that in best of fives, they actually draft like they have no fear. Like they do draft picks in a game 4 or a game 5 of a series that, like, forget even Western teams. Some Koreans wouldn't try these picks because they'd be like, I don't want to be like, like a dangerous comp or something that's hard execution or like a champion I don't play. Normally you go for comfort. Like if you remember back in the day, Monty, the old blind pick, that used to be where you could see that most pro players go for comfort over the strength of the pick. Like in that scenario, like they wouldn't even pick their pocket pick if they thought, but the lane matchup might be bad. They would just go for like the most boring, safe matchup. Well, G2 typically has shown the opposite mentality. Well, what's weird about that is best of ones in theories where doing crazy drafts and wild best of one variants should be great, but actually it seems to fuck them in the best of ones. So why does what works for them in best of 5 actually seem to, because in best of ones, they're not a very good best of 1 team. Like they've almost never won a bloody group stage or a round robin. Like it's just basically when they were far and away the best EU LCS team that they won the regular split. Aside from that, they are a team who come in lower and then in best of 5s they get better. So can you theory craft any reasons as to why that would be?
I mean, from knowing them a little bit, or some of the players pretty well, they are a team where, let's say Wonder says, I want to play X champion top lane, just in theory. Let's say he's saying, I want to play here. If I play Teemo top, I'll carry the game. Then the entirety of the team will be, just I'm okay with that. I trust you, and they will go for it. So, I think that is where it comes from a lot from G2, that they have so much faith in each individual that if they bring up a pick that they see, right here, this is just the pick to go for, and this will be the best pick that we can get. And maybe we haven't practiced it much, maybe we haven't put much theory into it, then they will just trust it. And I think that's very much the philosophy that Grabs is also going with when he's drafting with the team. It seems like the players have a lot of autonomy in what they're picking. Maybe that is maybe not on the first 3, but at least from like the 4-5 picks.
Yeah, sure.
When it's more on counter picking for what they see against the enemy comp, and then they just have like a really broad pool of champions that they can play. So that is what makes them scary from like a best of 5 perspective.
I think to answer your question, it is a really bizarre conundrum, right? Because when we talk about G2, we talk about the strength of their improvisational abilities. What is special about this team and what is so fun to watch is that they can take unusual or unique game states and understand how to play them out better than any team in the world. Like, that is what is inspirational about G2 to me, and always has been, is that they will create scenarios that you've never seen before, and somehow they understand their win conditions and how to play out those scenarios with weird picks or like unique macro on the map that is challenging for other teams to deal with. So you would
They're sort
think
of like the speed chess masters, right?
yeah, it's like, so you would think, oh, well, they should be good in best of ones because they can throw their opponent for a loop and kind of win a weird game in a weird way. But you're right, that doesn't happen. I think it's some combination of their own lack of focus in best of ones. And, you know, sometimes they lose a game or two in a best of five, right? And then they adapt and do it. Here's a very weird theory that I have no idea if it's true, but I could see being a factor, is when you're playing a best of one as a pro player, you're really keyed into how that team is playing in that moment and that you're kind of engaged in the strategy that you're playing. And so when you start to play an extended series, you get accustomed to how that team is playing and you sort of go on autopilot a little bit about what is happening. So it's like, okay, well, we played this one game and they were playing in this style. So now this is what we're assuming is going to happen in game 2 and game 3. And the fact that G2 switches that up so frequently, probably like, unless you're really mentally engaged as the other team into like adapting to all their stylistic changes that are happening on the fly, I can imagine it's very difficult to do that, because playing a G2 in a best of 5 is not like playing another team that will have a consistent way that they approach the game and a consistent way that they play. Instead, you're dealing with like basically all of these stylistic shifts that are happening as the series goes on, which is not normally I mean, it happens in any best of 5, but not to this degree, not to the degree it happens with G2.
I like that angle, by the way, because that also would tie into why they've been the Korean killers, because that used to be one of the things that made Korea so strong in best of 5s, is the idea that if they get to a best of 5 that goes 4 or 5 games, they got all those games from which to learn how to play against you. But actually, G2 always fucks that up for you, because then they do a weird draft. They couldn't even predict because they didn't know they were going to do it 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, exactly.
I always just feel like, I could imagine those SKT coaches last year were like, what the fuck is this? Like, I just spent all week practicing and I haven't done any of the stuff we just predicted. Like, it's going to feel like a waste of your time.
I don't want this to be interpreted as some sort of bullshit chaos style, because that's not what G2 is. They know what they're doing. Like, the crazy thing about G2 is that their knowledge of the game, player by player, is so insane that it allows them to collectively understand the game states and to react in the good way to that. They're not doing things randomly. They're just, their game knowledge allows them to be this improvisational. It's like, if you understand music theory deep enough, you can start composing or improvising on the fly, because you can play your instrument at a level that exists, right? And they're more, I mean, we've made this analogy before, but they're more like jazz musicians. Like, it's not about, what I would say a Korean team is more like a classical pianist, and they're riffing on it a little bit, but ultimately it's about sort of technical ability and rote practice. And they each have their own flair that they can put into that music. It is very difficult to do that. What G2 are like, they're to use music history, if you guys understand it, they're like Charlie Parker, okay? Charlie Parker is a jazz saxophonist that came in, and jazz already existed when Charlie Parker was there. But what Charlie Parker did was break down the musical elements of jazz to such a deep level that he was able to improvise in a way that no one had ever heard before. And he was able to play off that music in a completely new and revolutionary manner. And that's what I feel like G2 is. Like, G2 is like the Charlie Parker of esports. And I say this in esports in general because I've never seen another team in any esport do this. Like, I think people really need to appreciate G2, because what they are doing not only in League of Legends is phenomenal, but within the broader scope of any esport is so fun and unique.
Put it this way, like, there are analogs, but even then they'd be like the greatest teams ever. Like, maybe like Astralis in Counter-Strike does that, but they're also the team that won all the world championships, So we're not talking about like low-level teams. We're talking about other like standout, transcendent teams that sort of go past their game. Because I'd agree, that's very, like, basically what people don't get about that is it's such a weird skill to have, but if you have, it's in some ways like a superpower. It's why I always tell people, right? You'll see this so many times on the internet. There'll be fans that'll see, like, for example, a best example would be, let's say, like, LS is coming on a show that I'm on. there'll be a fan who's like, oh, wow, LS is going to really stick it to Thorin about Nemesis. It's like, you notice that people almost never argue with me on these shows. And it's not, by the way, because I know more than them and I know of course not. It's just because, like, one of my skills is bantering and arguing. And so in that scenario, in a live setting, the reason I would win is because in a live setting, maybe they would have an amazing opening line. Like, they would have some great thing they could say about me. But the point is, in the moment, I can react like that. So I can make the game very fast. So, like, if I react instantly, now it's on you. Like, proactively, you have to now respond to me and react to what I said in that moment. You haven't got 10 minutes to go away and write an amazing response. So I think it's the same in the game. I agree. Because, like, I don't think I've ever seen a team that was as good. Like you say, Monty, it's when they're in a state where even they couldn't have prepared for it. That's the key part. It's not that there's some mega geniuses who just figured out all these weird... They're doing it on the fly as well, but their skill for adaptation is just unbelievable. Don't think I've ever seen a team that was as good.
Yeah, it's
including all the great Korean teams. It's a different game when they played,
Yeah, it's because they have so much game knowledge, right? They're not coming in with a lot of assumptions about what's going to happen. They can break down the game into its constituent pieces and then understand how those pieces work together better than any other team. Period.
I'll throw in another factor as well. One thing that I think will make G2 unique, in my opinion, probably till the end of League of Legends. I don't think any other team will ever be able to do this. They're the only team I've ever seen that actually fit the criteria of what a super team's supposed to be. As in, every player in a past team has been like a star player and then comes into this team with all 5. But they actually know, here's what normally makes all super teams fail. Is that as soon as one of the 5 players can't be the main star and has to be like a supportive element or a dog jungler or a support player that just plays whatever is idiot, as soon as that happens, normally you don't get any advantage from them being so skilled at the game because they're not getting what, like, normally a star player has to be set up to make his strengths work. G2 is one of the only teams I've ever seen where, depending on what game it is and what the meta is, the person who needs to let himself be carried in that game knows how to let himself be carried. That is a mad underrated skill for people who are some of the best at their position. Like, these guys don't have the ego. They really do. Just like, if it's the right game where Wonder's carrying, the bot lane will just let him carry the game. They don't like demand extra pick or like playing like an exploitative way. They just let themselves get carried. It's actually the ultimate secret of League of Legends. If idiot fans haven't figured it out, it's like half the people who are stuck in gold. It's nothing to do with their own skill. It's that they have to pick their champion in that game, and they don't notice like, oh wait, this is a game where I could have picked to tie into an earlier conversation, Oriana, and just gone even in CS and I'd win the fucking game, but they won't do it. They have to try and 1v9,
I mean, I've played against them a couple of times in best of series, so I know how it feels to get beaten by it, and I guess the way I see it is just their fundamental understanding of the game is so high that they know how to break the fundamentals within the game, and that's a skill that so few players have.
And then like multiple of them have it. It's stupid. It's like unfair.
Exactly. So exactly. So like whenever we played best of 5s against them, it was we did a lot of fundamentally right things, but they they found ways to punish us within the realm of actually good League of Legends. So I think that it's crazy to me that we have a team like this, and it's probably we have to appreciate the fact that these guys are playing together, because hopefully also next year, I think they are on the contract.
Yeah, they're signed again for next year. Yeah, I agree with you though, but we should just cherish this period now, because you know what? Think of the conversation we were having at the beginning of the episode, like bemoaning how NA sucks or the region's bad. I've made this point on the last few episodes, but I'm going to make it again. Stop making out like G2 is LEC. They aren't. They are outliers even to LEC. Yes. In fact, in my opinion, what makes them so good is that they transcend the LEC. It's not that LEC is a super awesome region and they just happen to be the best, like with Top from China, for example. Because here's the difference. When I take Top out of the equation, Gen.G could still win Worlds. There's even some outside world where maybe even Suning could win. Like, that region is just amazing. LEC is a pretty good region. They've got teams that have a chance, but G2 is like something special even for LEC. So, like, I hope people don't think that this is a conversation like, well, Europe's got it all figured out. NA are bloody idiots. Like, and if you take G2 out of the equation, Europe is like ahead of NA, but it's not drastic. So in my opinion, like, you have to really understand that, like, we might never get a team like this again from any Western region. It's actually like, it's one of those teams where it's almost a cliche, but it's actually a privilege to watch a team like that play. Even when they lose, I find something enjoyable in the game. Like I can see a moment where they were thinking of something, or I can see what they were going for, even if it didn't work. That's like the level that team's on.
It's also their attitudes too that are so good, and this is going to sound weird, but sort of their cavalier approach and their flippant attitude, and they just kind of don't give a shit, is so valuable because they don't get rattled. Like, it doesn't matter if they lose a game or they come in second place in this group. Like, they don't give a fuck. Like, they got out, and that's good enough. And
let me just contrast that a second, because the most obvious team is TSM, Monty, because of the expectations. And TSM has two of the biggest superstars ever from the West in Bjergsen and Doublelift. By the way, guys, this is the part people never seem to understand. Is the reason why TSM gets more blame is because they do win the championship domestically. So what they're showing you is, domestically, maybe they are better than Jensen and Reckless and whoever else, but like they never perform at Worlds, do they? These people never do it. But this is the point I would make. Nowadays, for the last few times those guys have gone to Worlds, dude, in their interviews before the tournament begins, it's like they're setting their fans up for like if we maybe fail, or like Doublelift's the worst now because he's gone like full cargo cult, mate. Like he's gone from like, well, in past years I always used to say we were going to do really well, but then we'd fail. So this year I'm going to say we're going to do bad and see if that reverse jinxes me, or I'm going to hop twice on the left foot, then do a reverse spin, no backsies, and if, like, where are you going, mate? Just play fucking League of Legends. Like it's the opposite. You want to be thinking less about the expectations, less about the pressure, less about who's on the other team. Because I'm sick and tired of every year having Doublelift just like fucking like half fillet some other AD carry in his group, like, oh, Ruler's so incredible. Who's the ice? Not supposed to be Ruler, you idiot. Can you actually have some self-esteem and win a few of these games? Like, it's one thing if you only lost to those guys and they're like the Titans. Doublelift talks this game and then he goes towards, he loses to anyone. Anyone who can sit in a seat and press go can beat Doublelift in a Worlds group. Like, this is ridiculous. So, and I think that really does, I'm not joking, that ties into what you're talking about, Monty. These guys don't come in with a strong mental frame. Even if I'm the underdog, I'm literally not exaggerating. Even if I'm the underdog, my mentality will always be, right, well, if I'm the underdog, it's going to be even harder. So I'm definitely going to get in my own way. I'm going to give it my best shot. And if I'm the underdog even, like we were alluding to with Fnatic, maybe I don't just play a straight-up game. Maybe I don't draft as though we were two evenly matched teams. Maybe I do a really big gamble in the draft to go for something that can get me an edge or whatever it might be. But the point is, knowing you're the underdog shouldn't, like, cripple you. If anything, it should make it so that, right, now I know the expectations aren't that this is going to be easy. Now I know how to mentally frame myself going into this match.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts, Kold? You've been underdog a few times, mate. You made it, sort of. You're here at least.
I mean,
whatever.
I'm just letting you. I feel like there's a lot of anger inside of you that needs to get out. So I'm just sitting back, enjoying you going off, and listening to your nice words about TSM. So
okay. So you're just basically playing the role of all the TSM players after they lose Worlds, and I'm Reggie.
But
right?
I think you have a good point about the fact that if you are a star player, when you go to Worlds, that is the time where you wanna take responsibility and showcase how good you are or how much you can take over over the game if you are given a good situation. And I feel like is it impossible to carry the game from let's say from bot lane doing Worlds? Absolutely not. Look at a guy like Jackalov. He has carried a couple of games. So I'm always a little bit hesitant on these kind of things because there are so much things going on behind the scenes that we are not aware of. But I would always vouch for the fact that the star players should take more responsibilities and either that or take more responsibility afterwards. And maybe I didn't have the right approach, or maybe I should have done more. Instead of I feel like every time I just see like we will come back stronger next year, and
yes. Just meaningless things to say.
Like, it means at this point it just doesn't mean anything, at least not to me. So I think the word responsibility really comes to my mind when you're talking. So I mean, and it kind of translates a lot to what we discussed earlier in the fact that if you want NA to succeed, the star players need to show responsibility.
Yes.
And that comes from, so for example, within the organizations, within the academy teams, if the star players takes responsibilities on the LCS teams and tries to push the entire squad not just the five players within the team, but also trying to help the entirety of the organization to elevate, then maybe that's the way to go. At least showcase some kind of responsibility to um, make the best out of what you can. And I'm sure that these guys are doing that in some way, but maybe they have to rethink the way they're doing it.
Yeah.
I mean, this has already happened, dude. Like, it's not like Fnatic was perfect in their group stage, but Southmake was just fucking every time he got a champion he could carry on, he just popped off in the whole game. Like, these guys showed us Jensen against G2. He was fucking carrying the whole game. Like, the idea that you can't do this. Listen, I don't blame Bjergsen for his teammates being bad. Like, he isn't the GM. But he is responsible for how Bjergsen plays. Like, give me one pop off, dude. Like, give me one game where you get the right champion. You just show me that you're good, you know.
Yeah, I think it's rough, but it's also, the pieces that are available around him are limited by the import rule that we said before, or are limited by the ability to train players. I mean, on the plus side for TSM, Spica actually looked really good this Worlds, honestly. Like, I think he played the best overall of anybody on his team, which is a lot to ask of a player who doesn't have significant LAN experience and, was in a high pressure situation. So
yeah, but these are all self-made problems. Like, for example, no pun intended, obviously. Like, for example, why is my jungler having to learn how to play jungle during the deep phases of the LCS playoffs of summer, which qualifies you the Worlds? Like, that shouldn't be an expectation for a top org from NA. Oh, but you already signed a different guy who you lied about publicly saying you weren't interested in, but then signed anyway, then fucked his career and then just dumped him, and now you're working with a weird backup academy jungler. All right, cool. There's one problem. Secondly, you've already paid Doublelift a king's ransom and given him an extension already. So you're already all in on him. You've already got him and Bjergsen for next year. So in that scenario, that isn't just some random AD carry. That's one of the best players in the region. So where's his play? Dog shit, of course. Never turned up to Worlds. Then you go elsewhere on the map. Like, give me a break, mate. Like, when it never stops. And these are all self-created problems. No one made them do any of this shit. Like, no one. In fact, the maddest thing of all, Monty? TSM has the least excuses with the import rule. Because they're the team, they never did it, by the way, because they're fucking morons. Reginald is actually brain dead. But they were the team that, because they have Bjergsen, could have abused the fucking import rules. They could literally have made the team me and you would make, Monty, with like Core JJ and Bjergsen, and then some God tier jungler, and then some impact as the top. They would have made the team we could have made, but they just didn't do it. So, like, if after all that, they then fail, the buck has to stop with them, mate. They don't even get to blame the region. They don't even make an advantage of the region.
it's true.
Do you think they will stick to the same team for next year?
I don't know about the overall team. Like, one of the things
they
about
have to
TSM
replace
is,
Biofrost. They have to replace Biofrost.
one of
It's
the
not an
problems
option.
TSM as a team has is they'll lie publicly and say they're happy with someone, but privately, I mean, those players sometimes will even tell you, oh yeah, I'm going to get kicked or whatever. So I personally think, even though they pretend because they won the LCS that they're happy with the team, I think the only people that probably are certain to stay is Doublelift and Bjergsen and maybe Broken Blade. But I think beyond that, there's potentially changes for all the other positions, at least, in my opinion, yeah. Just because financially they're already sort of all in.
I think you have to change Biofrost. I don't think that's optional.
He was garbage. Let's be real. Even in LCS playoffs, a lot of what got him by was just like he was like a mini Bjergsen. No one else knew how to play against fucking Rakan for some reason in 2020. And so anytime he would pick that, he just looked like a god. But that, again, you were never going to be able to pick that at Worlds and win. That was never going to happen for you. So I agree. As an actual player, put it this way, as an actual support player, the Treats guy looked better. I think he just fell apart in the playoffs for some reason. So I think they've got major problems in TSM. Like, it's not an easy off-season for them, but they created them all themselves, so what the fuck do I care? Good, suffer. Sign them all again.
It's also one of those dangerous scenarios where you end up using results-based analysis to look at your roster, which is the result is we won LCS, so let's keep the roster. But you're not looking at the fact that you had to make a lower bracket run that included like a bazillion game fives that you easily could have lost. Like, there's a world where TSM is like 4th or 5th, right, instead of 1st, and it's a very easy world to imagine. So I think you do have to make some changes.
The roster itself is also, I mean, they have only played for half a year, I guess, together. So I mean, I think maybe the general expectations are also like a little bit unfair in that sense, but we will have to see. It depends. What their ambition is. If it is to win NA, then maybe they can do it again. But maybe if they want to succeed at Wolves, then they maybe need to rethink their roster. But that is that is at least my take on it.
Let's talk about the other quarterfinal matchups here, because we should get around to those. We've already talked about the top Fnatic one, the Gen.G G2 one. So, I mean, there's not actually, I think, a lot to say about Damwon DRX. Like, this is one of the
I mean,
least...
we already saw it. It was the final, and it was a 3-0.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like, well, I feel like we know what's going to happen here. And
Especially because here's the worst part about that matchup is, in isolation, I actually feel like this is where not having a low bracket is fucking worlds, by the way. Because here's what's going to happen. Because the RX was in Top's group and finished second, when they now lose in the quarterfinals, every fan's going to go, who gives a fuck about the RX? They were never going to do anything. In a different group or a different bracket, they could have done so much more. Sadly, they won't get knocked out here.
They hit the top two teams.
Dude, the worst two players on my team can't be the top player in the jungler if I'm playing against Damwon Gaming. They arguably have the best top laner in fucking jungler. Like that's just done already. That's over. Like I've already seen this before. It's like if you saw the LCK finals. Doesn't matter how well Chovy plays. He can't 1v9 the game when it's someone like Damwon Gaming. It's not going to happen. That's not a 1v9 in that scenario. So unfortunately, this one is like a foregone conclusion in my opinion. I hope it's better than the finals, but Damwon's going to win this. Come on.
Yeah, I just hate it. I hate it for two reasons. DRX had to get top in groups, and then they had to draw Damwon in quarters. So they got placed with the two favorites for Worlds. So that just sucks immediately, right? And then not only that, but we have to see another best of 5 between these two teams, which we saw recently, and it wasn't close. And you know what's even worse is that now Damwon is even better at, like, what's worse is the carry jungle meta is now more developed than it was the last time they played across the board, across all of the teams at Worlds. So it's like, oh great, they're just going to get dumpstered even harder than they did before.
And the biggest problem I've seen from DRX so far, and I think this is a huge testament to why they will just lose 3-0 against Damwon, is that if they are not ahead, then they seem rather lost going into mid-game. But again, if they get leads, then they seem like a completely different team. And I think Damwon is just not going to give them those kind of leads. And then from what we have seen so far in the group stage, Damwon is just a much better team overall, especially going into mid-game compared to DRX. So I think the game will just be, maybe it'll be competitive the first 10-15 minutes, but after that, I think Damwon will just take over. So I actually think the other series, the LPL
Suning JDG.
Suning JDG is much more interesting. I was a little bit curious because after the draw, I looked at the LPL summer playoffs, and usually the teams get to play against each other.
These two teams didn't play. Yeah,
they never actually faced. So I was like a little bit curious. You know, when was the last time they played? And if I recall correctly, it's a long time ago since they played, and I was looking into the games a little bit, and it was some very, very competitive games in the series I saw, at least. The JDG won 2-0, but Suning was dominating the early game, and I think Suning has been looking really good so far in the tournament, especially in the early game. I think they have some of the best early game stats in the tournament. So I think this one is going to be probably the most exciting of all of the quarterfinals, and we'll go to 5 games. And I assume JDG will be the favorites, but I actually have after watching Bin play on the top lane, I'm voting for this guy.
Yeah.
Man. Like when he pulled out the Omnistone Camille Ignite, like he got a special place in my heart already. I thought that is some of the things in League that is so exciting to me when people pull out something you haven't paid much attention to and maybe didn't think about. Let me just say, like, he was really lucky in the first stages of the game with how the Omnistone worked for him. He had some lucky pulls on what mastery he got, but he also
a lot of that exists, by the way, in League of Legends. That is one of those things that Riot made. That's like, are these guys even pretending they care about competitive integrity? So we've got randomized dragons that just enter in the game that completely change the landscape, and then also, that Omnistone is completely ridiculous, man. Like, as we're saying, it is locked, so you can obviously have bad luck and it can fuck the whole game up. But like, I think stuff like that is so stupid it exists in the game. I know what you mean. It's fun if you're a viewer, but like, I hate that that's actually in the game, dude. Come on.
For pure entertainment, it was nice to watch.
Yes, exactly.
Like that.
Yes.
Yeah. I agree with you that it's a little bit silly, but I think this guy is like before the tournament I actually didn't know much about him.
Oh, he's
But
basically a no-namer if you don't watch LPL, yeah. But he's mad
yeah,
good though,
so
isn't he? Yeah.
so after watching him and the way that he plays the laning phase, I think is probably the best, if not the second best in the tournament. From maybe Nogari has something to say in that discussion, but um, he's just super aggressive and super fun to watch. And I think if Suning is gonna win, he's gonna be the guy that is gonna take them
X
over
Factor.
the finish line.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. But also on the other hand, he can be the guy that's gonna lose you the game. So
Sure.
I'm watching out for the top lane in this series and see because I think this will be very crucial.
Yeah, I think at least that, like, if we had to get a domestic matchup, like you're saying, at least it's this one. Like, obviously, in a world where we had a Top or JDG like split the 1-2 seeds, where we would have seen that again, it would have been less compelling.
Most depressing would have been if like Top just played Jing Dong immediately in the fucking
That's
first
what I'm
round as
saying.
well. Like,
Yeah,
give me a break.
yeah. Which
Luckily that didn't happen though.
which definitely.
Because as soon as I saw they finished first and second, I was waiting for that as well. It's like, well, whatever, just ruin the whole tournament.
Yeah, I think yeah, because JDG was put into the group with Damwon and did end up placing second. Like, that was certainly a possibility that could have occurred, unfortunately. So I am glad that we didn't just get the LPL and LCK finals repeats, because that would probably not have been fun and made the tournament even more predictable. At least I think there was an opportunity here for Suning to come in and actually take a win. I think the series is going to be very close overall. I out of all of the series, I think this one is easily the hardest to predict.
I agree. I mean, also from a jungle perspective, I think Kanavi can't. So during the group stage, he was playing a lot of Sylas jungle, and I think if he's gonna do that against, in my opinion, it's very disrespectful to pick that. I think it has no it should not see any play from the jungle. It's a good champion, but from the jungle, it really just sucks. Like the fact that he's even pulling this off. For me, it's either he's like a madman or he's just thinking, I can whatever I play will win. I would love to pick his brain on it. But if he's gonna do that against SOFM, I think that will be a big problem for
It
them.
seems like that is definitely not the play specifically against SOFM, who's going to play Lee Sin and will just try and fuck you up early game.
Yeah, I mean this guy, if he gets the chance to live in your jungle, he will live in your jungle, and it does not really matter what his teammates are gonna do. He will be there, and you have to be ready for it. And if not, he will take away your camps and walking away with his happy feet and just farm his own jungle. So it's definitely it's another mini game within the game, and especially with how the meta is playing out. Um, as I said before, I think top lane is going to be important, but after that, I think jungle is going to be the second determining factor in the series.
Yeah, I think it really, like you're saying, depends on how JDG chooses to approach this game, because I think there is definitely a world where if they come in with the wrong approach, that SOFM is just going to take over this series and win it for Suning. Because stylistically, it would be dangerous to do, I think, what JDG has been doing. So we have final predictions as we wrap things up here. I know we've gone over a few of these matches before, but I think we should have the final calls. I think Fnatic can win a game in the top esports series. I think that Selfmade will pop off at least one game, so I think it's probably 3-1 top. Is a reasonable call on that one. Your thoughts, Kold?
I agree with you. That is the easy call. But I also know Fnatic. Fnatic has that extra gear that they sometimes pull off a couple of times during the year. And if they pull that off during top and their top is not playing if they're just playing kind of like a cruise control style, then Fnatic can definitely challenge them. So I don't think in a sense that it will just be completely one-sided games. I think Fnatic has the abilities within their players to contest top, especially in the laning phase. So it will probably be a little bit closer than than anticipated. But I can't see a world where Fnatic beats top 3 games in a row. Like I just don't see that happening. So if that's 3-2 or 3-1, I'm a little bit unsure. But I think a lot of it comes down to how Fnatic shows up on the day.
I'll give nothing to Fnatic. 3-0 top esports. Better players in every single position, except maybe jungle. I'll maybe give that to Fnatic, especially because stylistically they play so differently. But I think TS is just going to 3-0 this.
They're just gonna turn it on. Okay, so Suning JDG.
Well, that's the thing. Luckily, the format in that sense does work in Fnatic's favor, because since it would have been 2 more games in a best of 5, no one cares how long you sit and cry for this time, Reckless. Like, you got in theory like 2 hours to waste it. You do you, and then just go home after that.
So Suning JDG, I think this one's the harder one to call. As we said, I think it's a 3-2 JDG, but I am not confident in my prediction here, just because of I think there are a lot of weird variables that are coming into play, as you mentioned, Kold.
Yeah, I actually have this as like my first upset in the tournament.
Ooh,
so
all right.
You pick Sonic to win?
Yeah, I actually think they'll win. It is gonna go 5 games, and they will win the 5th game. So that is my prediction. It's a little bit bold, but I think they have the tools to do it, and the meta fits them. So I think they have a good shot.
All right.
I'll take JDG 3-1 on that one. The problem I have with that one is, like, the strongest parts of Suning for me are actually like jungle and AD carry. Top lane and AD carry. And those are like 2 of the most reliable players on JDG. So unfortunately, I think for the series, they probably get smothered. So I'll take JDG to win that one.
Fair enough. All right, Gen.G G2. I think G2 wins this 3-2. I think this is a Fiesta series that's super sloppy from everyone involved, but G2 manages to pull it out in the end. I just don't think they can do it in 4 games.
I think the Gen.G will win the first game, and then G2 will win the next 3. That's my take on it. They will beat them once, and then they will learn and adapt, and then they will beat them 3 times in a row.
I think I will say I agree with that if we see Jankos like step up from the group stage. If we see group stage Jankos again, I see this going to 5 games. I think that's something that really needs to change. They've been struggling out of the jungle position, and even though this isn't the strongest jungle matchup that they're going to be encountering, they still need to get it together. But I don't have a lot of faith.
Watch them use 3 bans for jungle, and then first pick Volibear.
That would be quite
the old amazing classic. All the way around, of course. But yeah,
I hope I don't see that. In fact,
problem solved.
I hope I don't see that.
The problem I have with this is, I've said this in the past last year, is by the we got to Worlds playoffs last year, I heard the same things behind the scenes, like Damwon was winning all the scrims. But the problem is, we actually reached a point where it became almost impossible to pick against G2 in best of 5 series, because like the scenarios they were able to come back from, as I say, doing crazy drafts they're willing to throw out, it means that the other team can never really be comfortable until the series is over, which is very unusual. Normally, the team that's losing isn't the one making the other person sweat and have to change proactively ahead of the net. Like, they're not doing that shit. So as a result, even though in terms of like overall form coming into Worlds, I think Gen.G is probably the slightly better team overall. Obviously, even in the group stage, they looked more convincing. I have to pick G2 because there's 2 Worlds. Either Gen.G will just rock them completely and literally just 3-0 sweep them, and G2 will look shit. Or, as Monty says, I think it'll be really messy and G2 will win. I would say probably 3-1, 3-2, but let's say 3-1. I'll take G2 3-1. But it'll be messy as fuck. But that's the world that they're the best in. That's what they want to do. I think your way of describing it was good, actually, Kold, is that they know how to break the fundamental game state, and then the idea is from that, they do thrive in the chaos. If anything, they would have actually been the only appropriate team to call chaos style. But that term's just cursed and tainted fucking nonsense.
I think we have to be a little bit careful of using the G2 best of 5 aura buff they have, because if you look at the past year, they actually lost 3 best of 5s. They lost the World's Final, and then they lost 1 best of 5 against Mad, and they lost 1 best of 5 against G2. So how much, like, if you asked me 1 year ago before the Worlds, I would definitely say they have like this best of 5 aura buff that going into them, no one can beat them in a best of 5. But let's be real and look at the facts. You know, like, they have actually lost 3 best of 5s this year or in the past year. So I don't think we can just say that going into a best of 5 they will just crush it. I think with the way they play right now, there are definitely some issues in their play, but I think this is just a perfect matchup for them. So that's why I really think there's no way they're gonna lose.
Yeah.
Here's the pushback, though. Here's the counter. The times that they were unbeatable in best of 5 was when it was single elim tournaments, mate. When it's double elim, they've only ever lost to best of 5 when technically it didn't eliminate them for the tournament.
Yes.
The problem is, if you know G2, it's the same reason. Actually, another reason, in my opinion, that they don't give a fuck in best of ones is because usually it's the best of ones early on when they're not eliminated. So, like at that point, you're not under threat that you're out.
Yeah, they turn it on when it matters. For sure.
When you notice, even though they always are like narrowly getting out of groups, you know, they always do definitely win that last game. Like when they have to win the last best of one, they become like the best of 5 series. Like they turn their brains on and they're just a done thing at that point. So like I'm not pushing back completely. I definitely agree they're way more beatable this year than this meta. Like this meta around the Dragons, they're way more beatable immediately. But I think the difference is when they came to the lower brackets, they were always like a different beast completely to the people in the upper bracket. So I would suggest a psychological factor with that.
But then then that's the sentiment that we should push. That when it really matters, then that's when they show up. It's not necessarily that it's a best of 5 buff. Or,
Okay.
So
yeah, that's a better angle. That's more refined. Sure.
All right, and I think like the last one going in, we all know what this is going to be. 3-0 Damwon. Like anything where DRX even wins a game is going to be a surprise. Like
I would just like that. All I want from this one series here, I'm not going to ask anything as big as like to be an amazing game and some of the. All I want is this. I want there to be one game where Chovy doesn't just do well but in a loss, but just carries the game. I just want to see one really sick Chovy performance. That's all I need. Just give me that.
I'm just so fucking sad, dude.
Last Worlds where he was just playing tanks was like that was like I know CV Max wasn't there, but like whoever was coaching for like Griffin is like, what? Who hurt you? Like, what did they do to you as a kid? Like, what the fuck is this shit?
What I fucking hate about this DRX shit is that we live in a world where their only losses in this entire world are going to be to Damwon and top, and somehow they get eliminated in quarters. Like that just kill me. Like that just fucking sucks. The narrative around this team, as you were saying earlier, Thorin, is just going to be so horrible for that. They beat all of the other teams in the best of ones in the group stage. Granted, it wasn't very hard for them, right? But when you lose only games to top and Damwon and you still can't even make it out of quarters, that is just depressing.
Agreed. Like for all we know, with a lower bracket, maybe they come third.
Yeah, exactly.
And on the matchups, yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely that world. So hopefully we'll see some format alterations for next year where that can be a possibility. That's what I hope for, Kold. I know you're enthusiastic about World's format changes, right?
I mean, I was listening into the discussion you guys had in the start of the show, and I think you guys have some really good points that, at least from what we have seen so far during the year, I mean, double systems in both NA and NALCS and LEC has been great. Yep. It has made some sick storylines. The grind through the lower bracket, and the fact that one thing that I wrote down that I took away from it is the skill that is adaptation, and I think within League that is a skill that is so important, not just because of how you're constantly playing against different teams with different with
champions,
different skills.
Variables.
But also just the fact that you have to constantly adapt to the game that is changing, and then I think the when you can't always show exactly what you're capable of in a best of series, but the more best of series you have, the better you can adapt. It shows also that it can show that, or the players can showcase their different skill sets in terms of playing different styles. So I think sometimes you go into a best of series with a certain mindset. This is the way to play. I think a great example is Rogue doing the summer playoffs, where they went into the first best of series and just got smashed, and then afterwards they instantly changed their style and showed that they could play carry junglers, and suddenly they look like a good team. So I'm definitely vouching for that, especially also in worlds where we finally have international competition where the best teams can play against each other, and then we don't even actually get to see that many best of series. it could all, as you guys talked about before in the start of the show, like best of 3 series. I don't remember the name of the format
GSL
system.
style.
Yeah, so I'm not too aware of that. You guys are better at knowing
It's just
how
4
that
teams in a double elimination bracket. It's not complicated. It's just a double elim bracket with 4 teams.
Okay, so I mean, the more games that matters. I also really didn't like the fact that we had to watch games that didn't matter. I think it's just useless both from a viewer point of view, but also just from a broadcast point of view. So if I had to choose whether or not we go into next year with different format, I would definitely choose a different one. So that's how I see it.
Wonderful. Well, I think that'll wrap us up for this week, unless we have any final topics of conversation. We'll be back at the same time next Monday, to discuss the quarterfinals, because they will all be over. We're back on a normal Worlds and SI schedule without everything being wacky and weird days and super compressed. So should be fun. Thank you very much for joining us, Kold. Appreciate it.
Thank you for making me come here, or having me over.
That's what I do. I make you do things. And good luck with your coaching stuff.
So
hopefully,
that was definitely the wrong way to phrase it. I'm so sorry. But
no, it's fine. It's fine. I wish I had that kind of power, Kold. I wish I could make people come on the show.
What people don't know is that you're standing behind me, ready to slap me with the belt. You better fucking come on the show.
What people don't really know is we actually do make all the results happen the way we want. Like, it was me and Monty's powers combined, like that. Basically, we did it like He-Man style. That actually made TSM go 0-6 in groups. I told you not to fuck with me. I told you not to fuck with me. Your fault now. We beat you in the Holy War. We won LTS. Did I not say your punishment must be more severe? And was it not? I think it was.
The edging works. The edging paid off. The edging of TSM was successful in the end.
Tantrically fucking wrecked TSM. And remember, being as that's what the lesson I've learned from 2020 by reading media. Remember, Lena, the president's to blame for everything.
And with that,
okay.
nope, we're done. We're done.
We're done.
Right,
all right. Thanks, Kold.